Before you take another step in life, let me ask you this. Are you truly prepared for the challenges, the pain, and the inevitable setbacks? In this video, we uncover 50 timeless Stoic lessons that have guided the greatest minds in history. These lessons can transform your mindset, fortify your spirit, and help you master life's toughest moments. Stick with me till the end, because the final lesson could be the one that changes everything for you. Number 1. Speak less, listen more. Speak less, listen more is one of those principles that sounds simple, but it's incredibly powerful. It's not just about keeping your mouth shut for the sake of it. It's about creating space. Space for others to feel heard, valued, and respected. When you're talking all the time, you're not just filling the air with words, you're missing out on the chance to actually connect with people. Here's the thing, everyone loves to feel like what they're saying matters, but not everyone gets that kind of attention. When you speak less, people notice. It's almost like there's a mystery about you. They want to hear from you, but they have to wait for it, and that builds a sense of intrigue. You're not giving away everything at once. The person who holds back a little has control over the conversation without dominating it. You're creating a dynamic where when you finally do say something, people are more likely to lean in and really listen. They know your words carry weight, and that makes them respect what you have to say. But let's talk about the other half of this, listening. True listening is an underrated superpower. And I mean really listening, not just waiting for your turn to talk. You know the difference, right? There's a kind of listening where you're nodding along, but in your head, you're already crafting your response. Then there's the kind of listening where you're so dialed in, you're actually processing and absorbing what the other person is saying. That's the kind that leaves an impression. When you listen deeply, people feel understood. They feel like their words matter to you. That simple act of listening changes the entire vibe of the interaction. It's a mutual exchange of respect. When someone feels heard, they naturally respect you more because you've shown them something valuable, you've given them your attention, which, let's be honest, is something we don't always get enough of these days. Listening also gives you an edge. People reveal so much in what they say, and in what they don't say. You pick up on cues, subtext, emotions that others miss. The person who speaks less and listens more tends to be more aware of the room, the mood, and the people in it. You gain insight not just into what's being discussed, but how it's being discussed. This heightened awareness allows you to respond thoughtfully when you do speak, further elevating the respect others have for you. It also helps you avoid saying something you might regret. How many times have we blurted out something in the heat of the moment only to wish we had taken a beat? By staying quiet and listening first, you give yourself the time to consider your words carefully. It's a way of showing self-control and maturity, two qualities that others naturally respect. So yeah, speaking less and listening more isn't just about keeping quiet for the sake of it. It's about being intentional with your words and giving others the space to feel heard. It's a subtle shift in how you engage with people, but the respect and attention you gain from it, that can be a game changer. Number 2, keep your word. Keeping your word, such a simple concept, but it's a game changer when it comes to how people see you. It's more than just doing what you say you'll do. It's about showing others that you are dependable, that your promises aren't empty words just floating around. Think of it as a quiet superpower. People often overpromise and underdeliver, and that's where you can stand out by doing the opposite. The more you follow through, the more others take you seriously. It's like building a reputation brick by brick. When you keep your word, you're saying to people, hey, I respect your time and your trust. And in return, they start valuing your time too. It's like a silent agreement, you treat people right, and they'll do the same for you. There's something magnetic about a person who doesn't flake or back out. They become the type of person others naturally want to prioritize. Why? Because reliability is rare. And when something is rare, people gravitate toward it. But here's the kicker, it's not always easy to stick to what you say. Life happens. Things get in the way. Maybe you've overbooked yourself, or you just don't feel like following through on that commitment you made a week ago. We've all been there. However, this is exactly where Stoic wisdom comes into play. You've got to train your mind to treat your word as gold, no matter what. The Stoics teach us that our character is built on what we consistently do, not what we occasionally say. You might think, it's just one little thing, no one will care. But the truth is, people do notice. Even if it's subconscious, they'll clock whether you followed through or not. It's the small actions that add up over time. If you're someone who constantly shows up when you say you will, people will remember. They'll respect you for it. And guess what? When people respect you, they naturally prioritize you in their own lives. Now, keeping your word doesn't mean overloading yourself. If you've committed to too much, it's better to renegotiate or be honest up front rather than let someone down later. The key is transparency. There's no harm in saying, I thought I could, but I need to adjust. People appreciate honesty far more than broken promises. It's when you say nothing and then fail to deliver that the respect begins to crumble. Here's another layer to this, when you keep your word to others, you're also keeping it to yourself. Each time you follow through, you're reinforcing your own self-discipline. It feels good, doesn't it? To know that you can trust yourself. It's like an internal compass pointing you toward a more centered, grounded version of yourself. And others feel that energy too. In the end, keeping your word is more than just checking off a box on your to-do list. It's about building trust, respect, and a solid reputation that makes people see you differently. It's a ripple effect that touches every part of your life, and it all starts with a simple commitment. Say what you mean what you say, and then do it. Number 3, view insults as reflections of the insulter. When someone throws an insult your way, the first instinct might be to feel offended or hurt. That sting you feel? Totally normal. But here's the thing, insults are rarely about you. They're usually a reflection of what's going on with the person throwing them. Think about it, why would someone feel the need to bring another person down unless they're battling their own insecurities, frustrations, or issues? Stoicism teaches us to view insults in a detached way, to step back and see them for what they are, an expression of the insulter's internal world, not a statement of who we are. When someone insults you, they're showing you more about themselves than they are about you. It's like holding up a mirror to their own mindset, not yours. Let's break it down. When a person lashes out, they might be projecting their own fears, doubts, or feelings of inadequacy. Maybe they're frustrated with something unrelated, but instead of dealing with that directly, they choose to channel that energy towards someone else. You're just in the line of fire. It's like someone dropping a glass and blaming the floor for it breaking. The glass was bound to fall, and the insult was bound to come out, but it doesn't mean the floor, or you, had anything to do with it. Now, think about the power dynamics here. If you get upset or flustered by an insult, you're giving them control over your emotions. You're letting them dictate how you feel. But if you can see their insult as just noise, as a reflection of their own struggles, then you take that power back. Their words lose their sting. They become just words. A breeze passing by. One of the reasons insults can feel so personal is because we're wired to seek approval. We want to be liked, respected, and acknowledged. But when you understand that insults often have nothing to do with you, you can step outside of that need for validation. Someone calling you names doesn't change your worth. It doesn't diminish who you are. If anything, it tells you that the other person is the one struggling with their own self-worth. Of course, this doesn't mean you should dismiss every bit of criticism or feedback that comes your way. There's a difference between constructive criticism and a straight-up insult. Stoicism encourages us to be open to feedback that can help us grow, but we should be discerning. If the intent behind someone's words is just to hurt or bring you down, you don't have to take it on board. You can choose what to accept and what to let go of. And here's the kicker: once you start seeing insults as a reflection of the other person, they stop bothering you. You might even feel a sense of compassion or pity for the insulter. After all, they're clearly dealing with something if they feel the need to strike out at someone else. Instead of letting their words penetrate, you can stay centered, grounded in the knowledge that their insults are just echoes of their own inner turmoil. In the end, insults don't define you. How you respond to them does. And when you respond with calmness, confidence, and the understanding that it's really about them and not you, you'll find that people respect you more. They'll see that you're not easily rattled, that you stand firm in who you are. That kind of quiet strength commands respect without you having to demand it. Number 4, avoid gossip and idle talk. Gossip and idle talk, it's so easy to slip into, right? You're in a conversation, and before you know it, the topic turns to someone else's life, their drama, their mistakes. It can feel harmless, even fun, to speculate or trade stories about what so-and-so is up to. But here's the thing: when you engage in gossip or meaningless chatter, you're wasting more than just time. You're eroding trust, your own credibility, and the respect others have for you. Think about it for a second. When people hear you gossiping, what are they really thinking? Sure, they might join in, laugh along, or even add their own bits to the conversation, but in the back of their mind, there's a voice saying, if they talk about others like this, what do they say about me when I'm not around? It plants a seed of doubt, a feeling that they can't fully trust you. And trust is the foundation of respect. When you stay out of gossip, you send a different kind of message. You show that you value integrity, that you're not interested in tearing others down behind their backs just for the sake of filling a conversation. People will notice that you don't engage in that low-level chatter, and they'll respect you for it, even if they don't say it out loud. It sets you apart, in a quiet but powerful way. Now, let's talk about idle talk, the kind of empty conversation that doesn't really go anywhere. We all know what that feels like. It's those surface-level exchanges about nothing that just pass the time. There's nothing wrong with small talk here and there, but if your conversations are always shallow or aimless, people may start to feel like there's no depth to you. And if there's no depth, there's nothing to respect. By avoiding idle talk, you make room for conversations that actually matter. When you speak, it becomes clear that you're saying something worth hearing. You're not just filling the air with empty words. You're bringing thoughtfulness, focus, and intention to what you say. And that's refreshing, because in a world full of noise, people crave something real, something meaningful. When you're the one who brings that to the table, you stand out. And here's another layer to it: when you rise above gossip and avoid the fluff, you protect your own energy. Gossip, in particular, is a form of negativity that drains both the person talking and the person listening. It shifts the energy of a conversation toward judgment, comparison, and even envy. That's a toxic vibe. But when you stay away from that and focus on things that uplift or at least stay neutral, you're maintaining a sense of calm and control. People feel that from you. It's almost like a quiet strength, and they're drawn to it. Avoiding gossip and idle talk is also a kind of discipline. It takes effort not to get pulled into those easy conversations that go nowhere. But when you practice that discipline, people see you as someone who has their priorities straight, someone who values their time and energy. That's the kind of person others naturally respect. So, next time you feel the pull toward gossip or meaningless chatter, pause. Ask yourself, is this conversation adding value? If it's not, maybe it's time to steer it somewhere else or just stay quiet. Because at the end of the day, the words you choose to speak or not speak say a lot about the kind of person you are. And the person who rises above the noise. That's the one who commands respect. Number 5. Deliberately lower your expectations in relationships. When it comes to relationships, we all tend to carry around a suitcase full of expectations, some spoken, some unspoken. We expect people to show up for us, to treat us a certain way, to understand us without having to say a word. But here's the thing, when those expectations aren't met, we feel disappointed, maybe even hurt. And that's exactly where Stoic thinking can swoop in to save the day. The idea of deliberately lowering your expectations might sound counterintuitive at first. You might be thinking, why should I expect less from people I care about? But let's dig into that. Expectations are tricky because, more often than not, they're based on assumptions. We assume that others will act, speak, or react in ways we believe are right or fair. But everyone has their own way of doing things, their own set of priorities, their own struggles. When we expect too much from people, we set ourselves up for disappointment. By consciously lowering our expectations, we give ourselves the freedom to enjoy relationships as they are, not as we think they should be. Now, don't get it twisted. Lowering your expectations doesn't mean lowering your standards or accepting bad behavior. It's not about becoming a doormat or putting up with disrespect. It's more about managing your emotional investment in other people's actions. You stop tying your happiness or satisfaction to what others do or don't do. In doing so, you take back control over your emotional state. You're no longer thrown off when someone doesn't act the way you hoped or expected. It's like a cushion for your mind, a buffer against unnecessary frustration. Think of it like this: if you expect someone to always text back immediately and they don't, you might feel slighted or anxious. But if you approach the relationship with fewer demands, the delayed response won't sting as much. You'll feel more at peace because you've detached your happiness from their behavior. That's where real freedom comes in. The Stoics would call it amor fati, loving what happens, accepting things as they are, not how you wish them to be. Lowering your expectations also opens the door to more appreciation. When you don't expect much, the things people do for you feel more like gifts than obligations. It's a shift in perspective. Suddenly, the little gestures become more meaningful. You start noticing the good things rather than fixating on what's lacking. The pressure dissolves. Relationships become lighter, less burdensome, and, surprisingly, more fulfilling. And here's a little secret: when you lower your expectations, others start respecting you more. Why? Because they feel less judged, less scrutinized. They're free to be themselves around you. And that's magnetic. People like being around those who don't constantly need them to fit into a mold. In return, they're more likely to prioritize and respect you, not because you expect them to, but because they want to. So, by deliberately lowering your expectations, you're not giving up on people, you're giving them the space to be human. And in that space, respect has the room to grow naturally, without the weight of demands or disappointment. It's a subtle shift, but one that can bring you more peace and better connections. Number 6. Practice being anonymous to reduce ego. In a world where everyone's trying to stand out, grab attention, and make their mark, practicing anonymity sounds a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it? But that's exactly what makes it so powerful. The idea of intentionally stepping back, blending into the background, and letting go of the need to be recognized can feel weird at first, but it's a game changer when it comes to reducing ego. Here's why: when you're constantly seeking the spotlight, your ego gets bigger and bigger. You start to crave recognition and validation from others. It becomes less about what you're actually doing and more about how people perceive you. You want the applause, the likes, the comments, the pats on the back. And while that attention might feel good in the moment, it's a bit of a trap. Because once you get used to it, you start needing it. Your sense of self-worth becomes tied to how much people notice and praise you. The problem? That kind of validation is fleeting and totally out of your control. But when you practice being anonymous, it's like taking a deep breath and letting all that need for validation go. You start doing things just for the sake of doing them, without caring whether anyone's watching. It's incredibly freeing. You'll find that when you're not trying to impress anyone, you actually enjoy things more. The pressure's off. It's just you and whatever you're working on, without the extra weight of worrying about what other people think. And here's the twist: when you stop needing the spotlight, people often start to notice you even more. There's something about someone who doesn't chase attention that naturally draws people in. It's like they sense that quiet confidence, that ability to just do your thing without seeking approval. Ironically, the less you try to be seen, the more you stand out in a world full of people trying so hard to be noticed. But beyond that, practicing anonymity keeps your ego in check. Ego loves attention, loves being the center of things. When you intentionally remove yourself from that equation, your ego starts to shrink. You start seeing yourself as just one small part of something bigger. You realize that not everything revolves around you, and honestly, that's a relief. The pressure to constantly be on fades, and you can focus on what really matters. Being anonymous is also a great way to learn humility. When you're not the star of the show, you're reminded that the world doesn't owe you recognition. It humbles you in the best possible way. You become more grounded, more in tune with the people around you, because you're not wrapped up in how you're being perceived. You become less reactive, less desperate for approval, and much more content with simply being. And maybe that's the ultimate goal, to find contentment in the act of doing, rather than in the applause that follows. Practicing anonymity allows you to strip away the layers of ego and be okay with being unnoticed. It's a subtle but powerful shift that brings a deeper sense of peace and focus. You're no longer performing for an audience, you're just living. At the end of the day, the more you let go of the need to be seen, the more people will respect you. There's something compelling about someone who can work quietly, without the need for constant recognition. It shows strength, self-assurance, and a deep understanding that your worth isn't determined by how many people are clapping for you. Number 7, maintain your integrity. Maintaining your integrity sounds like one of those things we all think we do, but when life gets messy or the pressure's on, it can be surprisingly easy to slip. Integrity isn't just about being honest or doing the right thing when it's convenient. It's about sticking to your values, even when no one's watching, even when doing so might make things a little more difficult for you in the short term. It's like an internal compass that always points you in the right direction, if you choose to follow it. People notice when you hold yourself to a higher standard. They might not always say it, but they feel it. It's the way you handle tricky situations, how you treat people, especially those who can't do anything for you. When you maintain your integrity, it's not just about big, dramatic moments where you're tested. It's about those quiet, everyday choices. Do you take the easy route and cut corners, or do you stick to your principles, even if it's a bit more work? That's the real test. What's interesting is that when you live with integrity, you send out a subtle signal that people pick up on, almost instinctively. They begin to see you as someone reliable, someone who can be trusted, because you're consistent. And that kind of consistency is rare. It's easy to say you're going to do the right thing, but actually doing it, especially when it's hard or unpopular, that's a different story. And that's why people respect those who stay true to themselves. Integrity isn't about being perfect, though. It's not some lofty ideal where you never make a mistake. We're all human, and we all mess up from time to time. The difference is how you handle it when things go sideways. Do you own up to your mistakes, take responsibility, and learn from them? Or do you try to cover them up, shift the blame, or pretend like nothing happened? The way you respond when things don't go according to plan says a lot about your character, and people are always paying attention to that. The funny thing about integrity is that, in the long run, it makes life simpler. You don't have to worry about keeping up with lies, or getting caught in a web of half-truths, because you've stayed true to who you are. When you're consistent in your actions and decisions, people know what to expect from you, and that creates a sense of stability. They trust you, not just because of what you say, but because of what you do, repeatedly, over time. And when people trust you, they naturally respect you. They prioritize your opinions, your time, and your presence, because they know you're someone who stands by their word. It's that consistency, that unwavering sense of who you are, that sets you apart. When you maintain your integrity, you don't have to demand respect, it just follows. At the end of the day, maintaining your integrity isn't always the easiest path, but it's the one that leads to long-lasting respect. It's about showing up as your true self, every time, no matter the situation. And that kind of authenticity? It's magnetic. People can't help but notice. And they'll value you all the more for it. Number 8, control your emotions. Emotions, those wild, unpredictable waves that can knock us off balance if we're not careful. One minute you're calm, the next you're fired up over something someone said or didn't say. It's human, right? But here's the thing, letting your emotions control you is like handing over the keys to your life. And if we're talking about earning respect and getting people to prioritize you, learning to control those emotions is a total game changer. Now, don't get me wrong. Controlling your emotions doesn't mean shutting them down or pretending they don't exist. You're not a robot, and no one's expecting you to be. But if you let every feeling, every irritation, every anger spike dictate your actions, people will start to see you as unstable, even unpredictable. It's hard to respect someone who's always in reactive mode. They'll step around you carefully, not because they respect you, but because they're afraid of setting you off. That's not the kind of energy you want to put out into the world. You want people to feel safe around you, knowing that you won't lose your cool at the slightest inconvenience. So, how do you do it? How do you stop letting your emotions run the show? The Stoics had a great approach to this. It all starts in the mind. Before the emotions take hold, there's a thought. Something happens, someone cuts you off in a conversation, for example, and you get that flash of irritation. It's that split second between stimulus and response where the magic happens. In that moment, you get to decide, do I let this consume me, or do I take a step back and breathe? That's where the power lies. It's not easy, though. In fact, it's a lifelong practice. But here's the cool part, the more you practice, the better you get at catching yourself before your emotions take over. You start becoming the master of your own reactions. And when you're in control of your emotions, you come across as composed, grounded, steady. That's the kind of energy people respect. They see you as someone who doesn't get rattled easily, someone who can handle tough situations without falling apart. They'll start looking up to you, maybe even leaning on you when they need some calm in their own chaos. Another benefit? When you control your emotions, you're no longer at the mercy of other people's actions. You stop giving away your power to things you can't control. You become unshakable, and others notice that. They notice that they can't push your buttons so easily, and that makes them respect you more. You're not over here reacting to everything thrown your way. Instead, you're choosing your battles, staying cool under pressure, and making decisions from a place of clarity, not chaos. That kind of emotional control makes people prioritize you because they know they can rely on you to keep your head when things get intense. It's the kind of calm that draws people in, the type of energy that commands respect. So, the next time you feel your emotions starting to bubble up, take that pause. That one breath might just be the difference between letting your emotions control you and you controlling them. And when you do, you'll find that others naturally begin to see you in a whole new light, steady, respected, and worth prioritizing. Number 9, accept discomfort as growth. Discomfort. It's one of those things we all try to dodge, right? No one wakes up thinking, "I'd love to feel uneasy or struggle today." But here's the thing, discomfort is where growth happens. And if you want people to prioritize and respect you, you've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Sounds strange, but stick with me. When we face discomfort, whether it's physical, emotional, or mental, it's a signal that something is shifting. Something's changing. Growth doesn't come from hanging out in your comfort zone, doing the same old routine day in and day out. That's just maintaining. Real growth comes from those moments when you're stretched, when things feel uncertain, and when you're pushed beyond your usual limits. It's like your mind and body saying, "Hey, we're leveling up here." Let's be honest, though, discomfort sucks. It's messy. It makes you question yourself, your choices, and sometimes even the point of it all. But if you can learn to sit with that discomfort, to embrace it as part of the process, you'll come out stronger on the other side. And the more you embrace discomfort, the less it actually phases you over time. It's like a muscle you're training. At first, it hurts, but after a while, you get stronger. What used to feel impossible becomes manageable. What once scared you now just feels like another challenge. This mindset shift is key when it comes to earning respect from others. People notice when you can handle pressure, when you don't crumble at the first sign of difficulty. They respect someone who can stand firm, even when things aren't going their way. It shows resilience, which is a trait that commands admiration without you having to demand it. Discomfort also brings clarity. When you're uncomfortable, you're forced to pay attention. You can't coast. You've got to assess, adapt, and figure out a way forward. In those moments, you learn more about yourself than you ever would when everything's going smoothly. You discover your limits, your strengths, and how much you're really capable of handling. Spoiler, it's usually way more than you think. Now, here's where Stoicism really comes into play. A lot of discomfort comes from resisting what's happening. We get stressed or anxious because we're fighting against reality. Stoicism teaches us to accept things as they are. If you stop resisting discomfort and instead lean into it, it loses its grip on you. You realize that discomfort isn't this big, bad thing to be avoided at all costs. It's just part of life, part of the human experience. And when you stop viewing it as a threat, it becomes less daunting. You'll also notice something interesting. The more you accept discomfort, the more grounded you feel. You're no longer thrown off by every challenge or setback. People pick up on that. They see someone who can weather the storm, who doesn't shy away from tough situations. That kind of calm in the face of adversity? That's powerful. And people respect it deeply. So, next time you feel that discomfort creeping in, don't panic. Don't run from it. Accept it. Sit with it. Let it teach you something. Because on the other side of that discomfort is growth. And with growth comes confidence, resilience, and yes, respect. Number 10. Imagine living as though today were your last day. Imagine waking up in the morning with the thought, what if today was my last day? It's not a gloomy or morbid exercise, it's actually about being alive in the truest sense. It's about making the most of the present moment, squeezing the juice out of every hour, and letting go of the distractions and nonsense that usually cloud your day. When you carry this mindset, things start to shift. Your priorities become sharper, your time feels more precious, and suddenly, the stuff that used to stress you out, it doesn't feel so heavy anymore. When you live like today could be your last, you don't waste time. You stop procrastinating on the things that matter, because there's no later to rely on. There's just now. It's not about cramming your day full of stuff to do, it's about doing the things that actually matter. You know, the conversations that go deeper than just surface-level small talk. The work that you care about. The people who matter most to you. If today were your last, Would you spend it endlessly scrolling on your phone or stressing over something that's out of your control? Probably not. You'd choose what actually makes you feel alive. But here's the real magic of this mindset: it pulls you out of autopilot. So much of life is lived on cruise control, just going through the motions. We get caught up in routines, tasks, and all the little things that don't really matter in the grand scheme. When you think, "What if this was it?" you wake up. Every conversation feels a little more real. Every decision you make is intentional. You're fully present, and people feel that from you. There's something magnetic about a person who's living with that kind of awareness, with that kind of intensity. And when you start living with that kind of focus, you naturally command more respect. You're not drifting. You're not wasting time or energy on things that don't align with who you are or what you value. People pick up on that. They can sense that you're someone who's living with purpose, someone who doesn't take time for granted. It's hard not to respect someone who approaches life with that kind of clarity and drive. You become someone they prioritize, because your time feels valuable. And you know what? It is. Also, when you live like today could be your last, you let go of a lot of the petty stuff. Grudges, resentments, the little annoyances that normally get under your skin, they don't seem so important anymore. You become quicker to forgive, quicker to focus on what really matters. You stop sweating the small stuff, because why would you waste your last day on that? People respect those who can rise above the trivial and stay focused on the bigger picture. It's not about rushing or cramming your life into one day, it's about living fully, with presence and intention. When you embrace that mindset, you stop letting life happen to you. You start choosing how to spend your time, how to respond to challenges, and how to engage with others. You take control, and that's where the real power lies. Living like today could be your last day reminds you that life isn't infinite. That every moment you have is precious. And when you start treating your time that way, other people will start treating it that way too. Respect follows naturally because you're living with purpose, with urgency, and with a sense of appreciation for the moment you're in. And that's the kind of energy that people can't help but notice. In the next section we will discuss how to practice stoicism in a modern world. Number 1. Avoid extremes. Choose balance in all aspects of life. Life often feels like a constant balancing act, doesn't it? We're always pulled in different directions, whether it's work and rest, indulging and restraining, or being ambitious and staying content. Finding that middle ground, where things feel just right, can be tricky, but it's worth the effort. The key? Avoid extremes. When we swing too far in one direction, life becomes more stressful, more complicated. On the other hand, when we learn to embrace balance, it brings a sense of peace, flow, and ease. Think about it. Whenever you get too focused on one thing, something else inevitably starts to suffer. Maybe you're too wrapped up in work and suddenly, your relationships start to feel neglected. Or perhaps you're chasing relaxation so hard that you find yourself falling behind in areas that need attention. It's a delicate dance, for sure, but a dance worth mastering. When you begin to notice these imbalances, it's not about swinging back to the opposite extreme, it's about finding that sweet spot in the middle. The beauty of balance is that it lets you enjoy the best of both worlds. It's like standing on a seesaw where neither side is too high or too low. You're grounded, steady, and yet still capable of moving. When you start living in this way, it becomes easier to make choices that align with your well-being. You don't have to chase after extremes, trying to prove something to yourself or others. You just know when enough is enough, and when it's time to step up or ease off. But achieving balance isn't about being rigid. It's actually the opposite, it's about being flexible. Life throws curveballs. Sometimes, things lean a little more toward one side, and that's okay. The key is knowing when to gently nudge yourself back into equilibrium. This flexibility is the foundation of living a balanced life. It's not a fixed point, it's a constant adjustment, a little give and take. And the more you practice, the more intuitive it becomes. Avoiding extremes also means letting go of the idea that life is all or nothing. So often, we get caught up in thinking we need to do everything perfectly or not at all. But that's a recipe for burnout. Instead, aim for consistency over perfection. A little progress each day, a little effort in multiple areas, adds up over time. It might not feel like a grand achievement in the moment, but it creates a life that feels fuller, more complete. And here's a secret: balance isn't boring. It doesn't mean settling for less or living in mediocrity. Instead, it gives you the freedom to enjoy life without the constant push and pull. It allows you to experience things fully, without being overwhelmed or deprived. It's about savoring the journey, rather than racing toward the destination, thinking only one extreme or the other will bring happiness. In the end, choosing balance is an act of self-care, a way of respecting your own needs while still engaging with the world. It's not about being perfect, it's about being present, adaptable, and, most importantly, kind to yourself. So, why not give it a try? Step back from the extremes and see how your life unfolds when you start living in the middle. Number 2, view setbacks as training. Setbacks, huh? They're those frustrating moments when you feel like life has thrown a curveball straight at your face. You were coasting along, doing fine, and then, bam! Suddenly, you're knocked off course. But here's the thing: setbacks are not the end of the road. They're more like the unexpected pit stops along the way that give you a chance to learn something new, even if it's not what you signed up for. I know. Nobody likes to hear that in the moment. But if you shift your mindset just a little, you'll see setbacks not as roadblocks but as training grounds. They're opportunities in disguise, and I promise you, there's something to be gained every single time. Think about it. When everything goes smoothly, you don't really learn all that much. It's nice, of course, it feels good. But it's in the tough moments, the frustrating stumbles, that you truly develop your resilience. It's like working out. You don't build muscle by lifting feathers, right? You need resistance. Setbacks are that resistance for your life. They're the tough weights that push you, that challenge you. And, just like with working out, it can hurt. It can be uncomfortable. But the growth? It's undeniable. When you hit a setback, instead of immediately spiraling into frustration or self-doubt, try to pause. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, what am I supposed to learn from this? Sometimes the lesson isn't obvious at first. Maybe it's about patience. Maybe it's about finding a new approach. Or maybe, just maybe, it's about toughening up. Whatever it is, if you approach it as part of your training, it shifts the way you experience the setback. Suddenly, it's not an attack on your progress, but a step within it. Also, keep in mind that setbacks often push you into a kind of trial-by-fire situation where you have to get creative, think outside the box, or tap into parts of yourself you didn't even know were there. And those are the moments when you really start to grow. It's as if life is saying, okay, time to level up. So, in a weird way, setbacks are like life's version of a coach that pushes you to be better, stronger, and more capable. But here's something key to remember: setbacks don't define you. They're just moments, not permanent states of being. They don't mean you're a failure, they mean you're human. The more you train yourself to view these moments as part of your growth, the less power they have over you. Instead of getting stuck, you start to bounce back faster. You build that mental and emotional muscle that says, okay, this is tough, but I can handle it. That's where the magic happens. So, next time life throws a wrench in your plans, don't be too quick to curse it. Yeah, it's annoying. It's frustrating. But also, take a second to realize that this is part of your training. It's shaping you into someone who can handle more, someone who knows how to pivot, adapt, and come out stronger on the other side. It's not about avoiding the challenges, it's about embracing them as part of your journey to balance. And at the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about? Finding that balance between the highs and lows, the wins and losses, the smooth stretches and the setbacks? You don't have to love the tough moments, but you can definitely learn to respect them. They're just part of the ride. Number 3, practice mindfulness and presence. You know that feeling when your mind is racing a million miles a minute? It's like you're physically in one place but mentally scattered, juggling tasks, to-dos, and random thoughts all at once. That's what happens when you're not present, when you're caught up in the swirl of what's coming next or what already happened. The solution? Mindfulness. It's the antidote to that chaos, the secret ingredient that helps you stay grounded. Being mindful doesn't mean you need to sit cross-legged in silence for hours. Not at all. It's about paying attention, intentionally. It's that simple, yet we often forget to do it. When you're mindful, you're tuning into the here and now. You're savoring what's happening in the moment instead of rushing past it. It's like pressing pause on the busyness of life so you can really be in the moment, even if that moment is as ordinary as washing dishes or drinking your morning coffee. Now, this doesn't mean the thoughts in your head magically disappear. You'll still have them, but mindfulness helps you notice those thoughts without letting them run the show. Instead of getting swept away by them, you acknowledge they're there and then let them go. It's like watching clouds pass by in the sky, acknowledging they exist but not chasing after them. When you practice mindfulness regularly, even just for a few minutes each day, it starts to spill over into the rest of your life. Suddenly, you're able to focus more at work, engage more deeply in conversations, and notice the little things that usually fly under the radar. Mindfulness helps you sharpen your awareness of everything around you, and it invites a deeper connection with whatever you're doing. One of the biggest benefits of being more present is that it helps you find balance. Life is a constant tug-of-war between different extremes, whether it's work versus rest, ambition versus contentment, or even excitement versus calm. When you're mindful, you start to sense when things are getting out of whack. You recognize when you're pushing too hard or not paying enough attention to your needs. It's like a built-in check and balance system that keeps you on course, reminding you to realign when necessary. And then there's the stress factor. When you're always thinking ahead or ruminating on the past, stress sneaks in and starts to take over. Mindfulness pulls you back from that edge. When you're fully engaged with the present moment, there's no room for stress to breed. You're no longer worrying about what might happen or regretting what already did. Instead, you're giving your full attention to whatever is in front of you, whether that's a task, a conversation, or even just breathing. Let's be real, it takes practice. You won't get it right all the time, and that's okay. Sometimes you'll drift off into autopilot mode, and other times you'll catch yourself and pull yourself back to the present. The key is to keep coming back to that mindful space whenever you notice you're slipping away. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. And over time, the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. So, give it a try. Start with small moments, maybe during your next meal or while taking a walk. Pay attention to what's around you, how your body feels, what thoughts are popping up in your mind. And when you get distracted, because you will, gently bring your focus back. No judgment, no pressure, just a simple return to the now. The more you do this, the more you'll find that sweet spot where balance comes more easily, and life feels a little more aligned. Number 4, cultivate a sense of shared humanity. In a world that feels so divided, finding a sense of shared humanity can seem like an elusive goal. It's easy to fall into the habit of seeing differences first, focusing on what separates us rather than what connects us. But here's the thing, when you take a step back, when you really stop to think about it, we're all just people trying to make sense of life in our own ways. And recognizing that, cultivating that sense of shared humanity, is one of the most important steps toward balance. So, how do we start? Well, it begins with something pretty simple: empathy. Yeah, that old word we hear tossed around, but how often do we really practice it? When you stop and make the effort to understand someone else's perspective, something shifts. You don't have to agree with them, but you see that they're navigating the same world as you are, even if they're doing it in a completely different way. You might not walk the same path, but you're walking side by side, and that makes a difference. Now, cultivating a sense of shared humanity doesn't mean glossing over differences or pretending we all think alike. In fact, it's the opposite. It's about acknowledging those differences while recognizing the core of what it means to be human. There's this intricate dance between individuality and unity. By leaning into our shared humanity, we can respect the things that make us unique while still finding common ground. This approach brings a sense of balance into your relationships and interactions with the world. You stop seeing others as them and begin to see them as part of the larger us. It's like you're taking off the lenses of judgment or bias and choosing instead to wear glasses that show the full picture: complicated, messy, and beautiful. But let's be real. It's not always easy to cultivate that sense of shared humanity, especially when we're faced with people who challenge our beliefs, push our buttons, or seem to live in a completely different reality. In those moments, it's tempting to retreat, to fall into the trap of thinking you're right, and they're wrong. Yet, the very act of pushing past that knee-jerk reaction and digging deeper to find understanding is where growth happens. And with that growth comes balance. When you foster this mindset, you start to see the ripple effects in your life. Conflicts feel less heated, interactions become more meaningful, and your own sense of peace increases. You begin to recognize that everyone is carrying their own baggage, dealing with their own struggles, and chasing their own dreams. And that awareness? It lightens your load too. You don't have to carry the weight of judgment, defensiveness, or self-righteousness anymore. You can just be, and let others be too. It also means being willing to extend kindness and compassion even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because at the end of the day, we all want to be understood, accepted, and seen for who we are. And the best way to get that is to offer it to others first. In doing so, you help create a world where balance isn't just something we talk about, it's something we live. So, what's the takeaway here? It's simple but powerful. When you cultivate a sense of shared humanity, you bring more balance into your life and the world around you. It's a conscious choice to see beyond surface-level differences and connect with people on a deeper level. And in that connection, you find a kind of peace and harmony that can't be found through division. It's about being open, curious, and, most of all, human. Number 5. Study nature to remind yourself of impermanence. Have you ever really taken a moment to observe nature? I mean, really look at it, how everything is constantly shifting, moving, and changing. It's wild when you think about it. Nothing in nature ever stays the same for long. The seasons cycle through their endless dance. Plants grow, bloom, and then, just as quickly, wither away. The clouds roll by, rearranging the sky with new patterns every hour. It's like the world is always in motion, reminding us that nothing is permanent. And that, right there, is a lesson we can all use. Studying nature can be a powerful way to ground yourself in the understanding that impermanence is the only constant. It's easy to get caught up in our human lives, where we cling to stability, hoping things stay exactly as they are, especially when they're going well. But nature doesn't work like that, does it? Everything that lives eventually fades, transforms, or moves on. And that's not some sad, gloomy truth, it's simply reality. When you step outside and really pay attention to what's happening around you, it's like a gentle nudge from the universe saying, hey, things change. That's just how it is. The tree that stands tall today might lose its leaves tomorrow. The sunny skies might suddenly give way to a storm. And yet, none of it is wrong or out of place. It's just the natural rhythm of life. There's a peace in accepting that flow, rather than fighting it. You see, our desire to hold on to things, to freeze moments in time, is often what leads to stress or disappointment. But when you take a page out of nature's book, you realize that letting go and allowing things to change is a kind of freedom. Think about it, if everything stayed the same, life would get pretty stagnant, wouldn't it? It's the ebb and flow, the ups and downs, that give life its richness and depth. Nature embraces this idea fully, without hesitation. So, what can we learn from that? Well, it's a reminder that nothing, whether it's joy or sorrow, lasts forever. The good moments? They're fleeting. The tough times? They pass too. That's the beauty of it all. Impermanence means that things are always moving. You're never stuck in one place, even if it feels like you are. Just like the ocean's tides, life is always shifting, carrying you to new places, new experiences. Next time you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or even when everything's going great, take a moment to reconnect with nature. Observe how it doesn't try to hold on to anything. The wind comes and goes. The flowers bloom and fade. And yet, everything is exactly as it should be. There's a rhythm, a natural balance, in that impermanence. It's not chaos, it's harmony. The world isn't falling apart just because things are changing, it's finding its way to the next phase, the next season. This perspective can help bring balance to your own life. It's easy to get stuck in the extremes, clinging too tightly to good times or resisting change when it shows up. But when you remind yourself of nature's impermanence, it becomes a little easier to go with the flow. You start to see that it's okay for things to shift. In fact, it's necessary. So, study nature. Let it remind you that everything is always evolving, whether we like it or not. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a bit of peace in that constant state of change. It's all part of the balance, knowing that nothing stays the same forever, and that's perfectly okay. You can take a breath, loosen your grip on the need for control, and trust that life, like nature, will keep moving forward, just as it's meant to. Number 6. Practice acts of charity and justice as part of personal growth. There's something about giving, really giving, that changes you. And I'm not just talking about dropping coins in a jar or donating things you no longer need. True charity, the kind that comes from deep within, has this remarkable way of shifting your perspective, opening your heart, and growing you as a person. When you practice charity, you're doing more than just helping others, you're nurturing your own soul. It's funny how that works, right? You give something away, and somehow, you gain more in return. And I don't mean in a material sense. It's more like this subtle yet powerful transformation inside. You start to realize that the world is bigger than your own concerns, and that maybe, just maybe, there's something incredibly fulfilling about lifting others up. But here's the thing. Charity isn't just about handing over something to someone who needs it. It's about seeing people, really seeing them. Recognizing their humanity. Understanding their struggles without judgment. It's about acknowledging that everyone is walking their own path, and sometimes people stumble along the way. And you get to help pick them up. That act alone can change how you see your place in the world. And then there's justice. It's a word that's thrown around a lot, but at its core, it's about fairness. It's about standing up when you see something that's not right. And let's be honest, there's plenty in life that feels unfair. But rather than letting that overwhelm you or push you toward extremes, like cynicism or indifference, choosing justice helps you find balance. It's not about solving every problem, but it is about playing your part in making things a little more right, a little more just. When you start paying attention to justice, you begin to understand that there's more to growth than personal achievements or success. Growth doesn't just happen in isolation. It's tied to the well-being of others. The more you lean into that understanding, the more you expand your sense of self. It's almost like justice and charity stretch you in ways you didn't know were possible, making you more compassionate, more aware, and ultimately more human. It's also important to recognize that both charity and justice work hand in hand. Charity is the immediate response, the action that helps someone in need right now. But justice? That's the long-term vision. That's when you start asking why there's a need for charity in the first place. It's when you look beyond the surface to understand the systems and structures that keep people from thriving. Practicing both is a way of finding balance, not just in your life, but in the world around you. Here's where personal growth comes in. You can't grow if you're only focused on yourself. Growth happens when you stretch your capacity for empathy, when you get out of your own head and care about something bigger than your own comfort zone. Acts of charity teach you humility. They remind you that we all need each other in some way. Acts of justice, on the other hand, teach you courage. They challenge you to speak up when it would be easier to stay silent. Both require something of you, and in return, they give you a deeper understanding of who you are and who you want to become. And let's be real, this isn't always easy. It's one thing to drop off a donation or sign a petition. But the real work of charity and justice goes deeper than that. It asks you to be present, to get uncomfortable sometimes, to face the hard truths about the world and your role in it. But it's in those moments of discomfort that the most profound growth happens. So, how does this connect to balance? Simple. Life can easily become a me-centered experience if you let it. We focus on our goals, our problems, our needs. But practicing charity and justice pulls you out of that tunnel vision. It's a reminder that balance is about looking outward as much as it is about looking inward. You need both for a life that feels whole. Charity and justice, in their truest forms, are ways to grow not just for your own sake but for the sake of a better, more balanced world. Number 7. Pursue excellence in all areas of life. Pursuing excellence. It sounds like something straight out of a motivational poster, doesn't it? But when you really think about it, striving for excellence doesn't mean chasing perfection or pushing yourself to the point of burnout. It's about showing up every day with the mindset that you can always improve, no matter what area of life you're focused on. Excellence, in this sense, is less about a destination and more about an ongoing journey. Now, let's be clear. Pursuing excellence isn't about trying to be the best at everything, all the time. That's a fast track to frustration and exhaustion. It's more about bringing your best effort to whatever you do, whether it's your work, your health, your relationships, or even your hobbies. It's the idea that you can approach each part of your life with care and intention, making small but meaningful strides toward betterment. You don't have to overhaul everything overnight. Instead, excellence comes from those little adjustments and improvements you make along the way. But here's the catch: excellence doesn't thrive in extremes. It's not about grinding nonstop until you collapse or obsessing over every tiny detail to the point of missing the bigger picture. In fact, true excellence happens when you find balance. When you're able to give your best effort without sacrificing your well-being in the process. It's recognizing when to push yourself and when to ease off the gas. It's knowing that resting, reflecting, and recharging are just as crucial to excellence as hard work and determination. And let's talk about the different areas of life where this idea of excellence applies. It's not just your career or your personal goals. Excellence touches everything. It's in how you take care of your body, how you nurture your relationships, how you spend your time. Think of it like weaving a tapestry. Each thread, whether it's health, work, or connection, adds to the overall picture. When you pursue excellence across these threads, you're crafting a life that feels richer, more intentional. You're not just coasting through or focusing on one area at the expense of another, you're creating harmony. That doesn't mean you're always going to be equally excellent in every part of your life at all times, though. Life has its seasons, and sometimes one area needs more attention than another. And that's okay. Excellence isn't about balance in the sense of perfect equilibrium, but more about being aware of where your energy is going and making sure it aligns with your values and aspirations. Some days you'll excel in one area, and others might take a back seat for a while. The point is, you're always moving with purpose. Pursuing excellence also requires patience, with yourself and with the process. You won't always get it right, and that's part of the deal. There will be setbacks, times when you feel like you're not making progress or when things fall apart a little. But those moments are opportunities to learn, to reflect, and to come back stronger. Excellence isn't a straight line, it's a winding path full of twists and turns. And honestly, that's what makes it interesting. So, what does it mean to pursue excellence in all areas of life? It means showing up with intention, striving to do your best while understanding that your best will look different on different days. It's about balance, not perfection. It's about living with purpose, paying attention to the details, and understanding that excellence is not something you achieve once and for all. It's something you cultivate, day by day, across the many facets of your life. And in that pursuit, you'll find that excellence isn't just about the outcomes. It's about the process, the growth, and the fulfillment that comes from knowing you're putting in the effort to create a life that reflects your values. A life that, even with its ups and downs, feels balanced and meaningful. Number 8. Practice mindful silence to cultivate inner wisdom. In a world that's always buzzing, notifications pinging, conversations swirling, thoughts racing, it's easy to forget what silence even feels like. We get so used to the noise that the idea of silence can feel strange, maybe even uncomfortable. But that's where the magic is. Practicing mindful silence is like giving yourself permission to stop, just for a moment, and listen. Not to the outside world, but to something deeper, something quieter, something wiser inside of you. It's not about forcing your mind to go blank or sitting in a completely still space. Silence doesn't mean the absence of sound, it means creating space to tune into what's beneath all the surface-level chatter. There's a difference, right? It's about being present, fully present, and allowing your mind to settle, even if just for a few minutes. In that stillness, in those quiet moments, something shifts. You start to hear your own thoughts more clearly. You begin to sense things that were drowned out before by the noise of everyday life. When you embrace mindful silence, you're not just turning off the external noise. You're giving your mind room to breathe. Think of it like clearing away mental clutter. Suddenly, all those racing thoughts that pull you in 100 different directions start to slow down. And in that space, you find clarity. You find perspective. Sometimes, the answers you've been searching for have been there all along, but you couldn't hear them because the noise was too loud. Here's the thing, silence has its own language. And it's one we don't speak often enough. In silence, you begin to notice the subtle shifts in your emotions, the small nudges from your intuition, the quiet truths you might have been avoiding. Silence doesn't demand anything from you. It's patient. It waits for you to come to it, to be still enough to listen. And when you do, you begin to access a well of inner wisdom that's always been there. You start to see things differently, with more balance, more understanding. But cultivating mindful silence is a practice. It's not something that happens instantly. The first few times, your mind might still feel chaotic, like a room full of voices all talking at once. That's normal. You just let the noise be there without judgment and keep coming back to the quiet. Eventually, the noise settles. You find that sweet spot of silence where your mind is calm, but aware. It's in this space that your inner wisdom has room to rise up. It's where insights bubble to the surface without you even trying. And don't be fooled into thinking that mindful silence is only for times of peace or solitude. You can find moments of quiet even in the busiest parts of your day. It's less about the setting and more about your intention. You can be mindful in silence while sitting in traffic, while taking a walk, or even in the middle of a hectic workday. It's about learning to dip beneath the noise and tune into yourself. Practicing mindful silence doesn't mean disconnecting from the world. Quite the opposite. It helps you connect more deeply with yourself and others. When you're in touch with your own inner wisdom, you show up in the world with more balance. You respond rather than react. You make choices from a place of understanding rather than impulse. Silence gives you that space to pause, reflect, and find your center. So, make time for it. Let silence be a part of your routine, just like anything else you do for your well-being. Sit with it, listen to it, and allow it to guide you. In that quiet space, you'll discover more wisdom than you ever thought possible, wisdom that's been quietly waiting for you all along. Number 9. Strive for a state of serene calm and peace of mind. There's a certain magic in finding calm amid the storm, isn't there? It's like you're standing at the center of a whirlwind, but instead of getting caught up in the chaos, you just breathe. Everything slows down. And for a moment, the noise fades, and you're left with stillness, a rare, precious kind of stillness that can feel elusive in a world that's constantly rushing. But here's the thing, calm isn't something that just falls into your lap. It's not like one day you wake up and suddenly life is peaceful and serene. Nope. It's something you have to actively work on, something you have to choose. And that choice? It's not always easy. Sometimes it feels like the world is pushing you to the edge, daring you to lose your cool. But striving for calm is about learning to step back and say, I'm not going to let this control me. It's that quiet strength you build when you decide that your peace of mind is worth protecting. Now, don't confuse calm with doing nothing or being passive. It's not about sitting around, detached from the world. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Finding calm means engaging with life fully, but from a place of balance. It's being able to face whatever comes your way without letting it shake you to your core. You know how some people can walk into a stressful situation and just handle it? Like they've got this invisible bubble around them, protecting them from all the noise? That's the kind of calm we're talking about here. It's steady, it's grounded, and it's incredibly powerful. Peace of mind, on the other hand, is like the long-term effect of choosing calm. It's not just about handling moments of stress, but creating a mental space where you feel settled. It's that feeling you get when your thoughts aren't racing, when you're not second-guessing every decision, and when you've learned to let go of the things that aren't serving you. It's like you've cleared out the clutter from your mind, and what's left is this beautiful, peaceful expanse where you can just be. But how do you get there? That's the tricky part. Striving for peace of mind often means you have to start noticing the things that disturb your peace in the first place. It could be external pressures, internal worries, or even that constant need to be on all the time. Once you're aware of what's disrupting your calm, you can begin to address it. Sometimes that means making changes, big or small. Other times, it's about accepting that some things are out of your control, and that's okay. The pursuit of peace is also about balance. It's about finding that sweet spot between action and rest, between doing and simply being. Life has this way of pulling us in 1,000 different directions, making it easy to lose ourselves in the process. But when you strive for calm, you're choosing not to get swept up in that whirlwind. You're choosing to pause, to reflect, and to act from a place of clarity. And let's be honest, there will be days when it feels impossible. Days when everything seems to go wrong, and calm feels like the last thing you can manage. But that's where the striving comes in. It's not about being perfectly calm all the time, because that's just not realistic. It's about the effort, the intention behind it. Each time you choose to slow down instead of react, each time you let go of what you can't change, you're inching closer to that state of serene calm. Ultimately, striving for peace of mind is about finding your center. It's about knowing that, no matter what life throws at you, you have the ability to ground yourself. It's like carrying a little bubble of calm with you wherever you go. Sure, the world around you might get loud and chaotic, but inside, there's a quiet space that's all yours. And that's where true peace lives. So, don't expect to nail it all the time. Give yourself grace when the chaos gets the best of you. But keep coming back to that place of calm, keep striving for that peace of mind. Because in the end, it's not about reaching some perfect state of eternal serenity. It's about the journey, about choosing balance, again and again, in a world that's always tilting one way or another. Number 10. Reflect on your day through journaling. Let's talk about journaling. It's one of those things you hear about all the time, but maybe it sounds a little cliché or too simple to actually make a difference. But when you really get into it, journaling is like having a quiet conversation with yourself at the end of the day. It's not about writing a novel or documenting every single thing that happened. No, it's about pausing for a moment, reflecting on what went down, and giving your mind some space to process it all. A little time to sift through the noise, if you will. There's something powerful about putting your thoughts on paper, or typing them out if that's more your style. It doesn't matter how polished or perfect it is. What matters is that it's honest. That's where the magic of journaling really happens. You start to see things more clearly. Patterns emerge. Suddenly, things that felt overwhelming seem a little more manageable. Or maybe, you notice something you hadn't even realized was bothering you. Journaling is a way to bring balance into your day, especially when life feels like it's moving too fast or pulling you in a million directions. By reflecting on what happened, whether it was a great day, a challenging one, or just a typical Tuesday, you create a space where you can step back and make sense of it all. It's like hitting the pause button before jumping into the next thing. And here's the thing, you don't need to stick to some rigid format. There are no rules here. Some days you might feel like pouring your heart out, and other days maybe just a sentence or two feels right. Even a list of what went well and what didn't can be enough. The key is to let it flow naturally, to make it your own, because that's what makes journaling such a personal and grounding practice. It's less about what you write and more about how it makes you feel afterward. But beyond mental clarity, journaling helps you stay grounded in your goals, your values, and, most importantly, yourself. When you take a few minutes to reflect, you're more likely to spot those areas where things are out of balance. Maybe you've been focusing too much on one part of your life, while another has been quietly slipping by unnoticed. Or perhaps, through journaling, you realize that what seemed like a small win earlier in the day was actually something worth celebrating. It's about perspective. Journaling shifts you from being in the thick of things to being an observer of your own life. And from that vantage point, you can see where adjustments might be needed, where you're leaning too far into extremes, or where you've found that sweet spot of balance. One of the underrated parts of journaling is that it forces you to slow down. In a world where everything moves at a breakneck speed, where we're constantly bombarded with information and distractions, taking 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the day to reflect can feel like a breath of fresh air. You don't have to figure everything out right then and there, but at least you're giving yourself the chance to tune in and check where you stand. It's also a way to track your progress. Over time, those little entries start to add up. You begin to see how far you've come, how much you've grown. And on those tough days when everything feels off-kilter, looking back at those pages can remind you that balance is something you're constantly working toward. It's not a one-time achievement. Some days you'll be off, and that's okay. But by reflecting, you're giving yourself the tools to get back on track. In the end, journaling isn't just about recording your day, it's about creating a habit of reflection that helps you keep balance in your life. It's a simple practice, but its impact can be profound. Because when you take time to listen to yourself, you start to live with more intention, more clarity, and yes, more balance. Next, let's go over important life lessons shared by Aristotle. Number 1. The significance of purpose in all aspects of life. Aristotle had this deeply ingrained belief that purpose, or telos as he called it, wasn't just some lofty ideal reserved for philosophers to ponder, it was the glue that held everything together. He thought that everything in life, from the smallest detail to the grandest goal, is driven by a kind of inner purpose, and if you ignore that, you're missing out on the full experience of living. We've kind of lost touch with that understanding in modern times, haven't we? We often get so caught up in day-to-day distractions that we forget to ask, what's the purpose behind what I'm doing? When Aristotle talked about purpose, he wasn't talking about it like some big, abstract mission statement. He saw it in everything. Each action, each decision, whether big or small, had its own purpose that led to something bigger. He would argue that living a fulfilled life means being in tune with this sense of purpose across all areas of your life, not just career or success. Your relationships, your hobbies, how you spend your free time, it all ties back to a deeper meaning. But how often do we pause to reflect on that? Nowadays, it's easy to get stuck in routines, following the same patterns without really questioning why. Our daily lives often become a string of obligations, appointments, and to-do lists. It's easy to see life as a series of tasks to complete rather than a journey to pursue meaning. That's where Aristotle's wisdom comes in. He'd probably tell us that we've become too focused on the surface, on achieving for the sake of achieving, without connecting it to the bigger picture of why we're doing it. What's the point if we're just going through the motions? The beauty of Aristotle's thinking is that it encourages us to ask ourselves those deeper questions regularly. It's not just about having one grand purpose in life, it's about finding the purpose in all of life's moments. This idea applies not just to what we think of as big decisions, like choosing a career path or setting life goals, but also to the simple, everyday choices. Why do you spend your time the way you do? What's driving you? Is there an underlying reason for the things that fill your days, or are you simply doing them out of habit? Aristotle believed that living with purpose wasn't just about working towards some final goal either. It was about aligning your actions with your values and making sure that everything you do reflects a deeper understanding of what's important to you. That's what brings fulfillment. It's not about hustling through life or constantly chasing success. Instead, it's about living intentionally, fully aware that each step you take is part of a larger, meaningful journey. So, maybe we've forgotten how to look for purpose in the everyday life. But Aristotle reminds us that it's always there, if only we take the time to notice. Living a life of purpose isn't reserved for monumental achievements or grand aspirations. It's about making sure that every choice, every action, even the small ones, reflects who we are and what we truly value. That's the kind of life worth living. Number 2, the belief that true happiness is not found in pleasure alone. Aristotle had a pretty unique take on happiness, one that doesn't really line up with the way many of us think about it today. We live in a world where it seems like happiness is wrapped up in the pursuit of pleasure, whether that's indulging in a tasty meal, going on a vacation, or getting that quick dopamine hit from scrolling through social media. And yeah, those moments feel good. Really good, sometimes. But Aristotle? He believed true happiness, or eudaimonia as he called it, went much deeper than fleeting pleasures. For Aristotle, pleasure wasn't bad, let's not misunderstand him there. It just wasn't the whole picture. He argued that while pleasure is part of a happy life, chasing it alone doesn't lead to that lasting sense of fulfillment we all crave. You might enjoy something in the moment, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're living a fully happy life. Think of it this way, imagine a bucket with a small hole at the bottom. Pleasure is like pouring water into the bucket, it'll fill up for a while, but then it'll start to drain. You need to keep adding more to maintain that level. That's what happens when we rely only on pleasure, it fades, and you're left wanting more. It's kind of an endless chase. So, what's the alternative, then? Aristotle had this idea that the real key to happiness was living in alignment with virtue. Now, virtue might sound like a heavy word, something reserved for moral philosophers or maybe even outdated. But for Aristotle, it was practical. Being virtuous meant living well, developing good habits, and acting in ways that were consistent with our best selves. It's not about being perfect or saintly, it's more about balance, finding that sweet spot between extremes. He had a concept called the golden mean, which basically means not going overboard with things, but also not depriving yourself. Let's break it down a little more. If you're only after pleasure, you might miss out on some important things. For example, acting selfishly to get what feels good for you in the moment might hurt someone else, and that can ripple back into your own life in negative ways. Or maybe you find yourself in a cycle of overindulgence, where too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing. Aristotle believed happiness was found in living in a way that not only benefits you but also enriches the people around you and your community as a whole. It's a long-term investment, rather than a quick fix. He also pointed out that some of the deepest forms of satisfaction come not from what we take in, like pleasure, but from what we give or create. Think about developing skills, building relationships, or contributing to something larger than yourself. These things might not give that instant pleasure high, but they bring a kind of lasting joy that sticks with you. You grow as a person, and that growth is what sustains happiness. In today's world, it's easy to forget this. We're surrounded by messages that encourage instant gratification. Buy this, eat that, experience this, and then you'll be happy. But Aristotle would say that real happiness isn't in those quick hits of pleasure. It's in the long game, where you cultivate virtues, grow in wisdom, and live with purpose. So, sure, enjoy pleasure when it comes, it's part of life. But don't expect it to carry the full weight of your happiness. There's something deeper, more enduring, waiting for you when you live with intention and care. It's not always easy, and sometimes it takes effort, but that's where true happiness is found. Aristotle knew that, and maybe, just maybe, we've forgotten it along the way. Number 3, the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. The pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, what a lost art that has become. In Aristotle's time, the idea of learning was deeply intertwined with the joy of discovery itself. There wasn't this constant need to justify it, to attach a useful label to every nugget of wisdom. Today, we often treat learning as a means to an end. It's all about the next certification, the promotion, the problem you need to solve right now. But Aristotle? He saw knowledge as something more. Something deeper. He believed in learning simply for the sheer pleasure of it, for the way it expands your mind, opens up new worlds, and satisfies your innate curiosity. That's the thing, curiosity was at the heart of it all. Aristotle understood that the desire to know, to understand, was a natural part of being human. It's like we're wired to be curious. But somewhere along the way, we lost that spark. We became so obsessed with the utility of knowledge that we forgot how to learn just for the joy of it. Nowadays, people tend to approach learning like it's a checklist. We gather information when it's necessary, and we stop once we have enough. Everything becomes a transaction. What will I get out of this? Instead of an experience. But back in Aristotle's day, learning was more like an adventure. You didn't just pursue knowledge to check a box. You pursued it because it made you more alive, more connected to the world around you. It was less about answers and more about the questions. There's something beautifully liberating about that. Imagine just diving into a subject because you're fascinated by it, not because it will get you somewhere. It's the difference between living life by the map and exploring life without one. Aristotle saw knowledge as a kind of nourishment for the soul. You didn't need to justify it. It wasn't about practicality, at least not in the short term. In the long run, maybe, sure, knowledge might come in handy. But the journey, the process of learning itself, was enough of a reward. That's a mindset we've largely lost. It's not that we don't value education today, we do. But we've added all these layers of expectation on top of it. Everything needs to be tied to achievement, to productivity, to success. The joy of learning for learning's sake? It's been overshadowed by the pressure to turn that learning into something useful. And that's a shame, because when we allow ourselves to be curious without any expectations, that's when the magic happens. You follow the thread of your curiosity wherever it leads you. No pressure, no deadlines. Just pure, unfiltered exploration. When was the last time you did that? Just let yourself get lost in learning without worrying about whether it would pay off? That's the kind of thing Aristotle cherished. In his world, knowledge wasn't something to be hurried. It wasn't a stepping stone. It was a way of life. So maybe it's time to recapture that, ditch the constant need for usefulness and rediscover the simple joy of learning. Because sometimes, knowing for the sake of knowing is enough. More than enough, actually, it's everything. Number 4, the importance of moderation in pleasures, including intellectual ones. Aristotle had this remarkable idea about pleasure, whether it's physical, emotional, or intellectual. He didn't say pleasures were bad, far from it. In fact, he recognized that pleasure is a natural part of life, something we all seek and enjoy. But, as with so many things, he believed in balance. He taught that while pleasure is important, indulging too much in it, even intellectual pleasures, can lead us off track. He was all about moderation, finding that sweet spot where we enjoy life but don't lose ourselves in the pursuit of pleasure. Let's talk about intellectual pleasures for a moment. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that feeding the mind is inherently good, right? If it's something like learning, reading, or exploring new ideas, that can't be a bad thing, can it? But Aristotle would caution us here. Even too much of what seems like a noble pleasure, like the satisfaction we get from deep thinking or learning new things, can become imbalanced. He saw that there's a danger in becoming consumed by intellectual pursuits, just as there's a danger in overindulging in more obvious pleasures like food or drink. It's all too easy to tip the scale from a healthy curiosity to an obsession that leaves us disconnected from the rest of life. What Aristotle really emphasized was the idea of moderation. Not just for the obvious pleasures we typically associate with indulgence, but for everything. It's like he was warning us against getting carried away, even with things that seem good on the surface. Pleasure, in any form, needs to be balanced with other parts of life to make sure we're not overextending ourselves in one direction and neglecting everything else. This brings us to the concept of the golden mean. It's a simple but powerful idea. The best life is lived in balance. In Aristotle's view, moderation wasn't about denying pleasure or avoiding it altogether, it was about enjoying it in the right amounts. You don't need to give up pleasure to live well, but you do need to know when enough is enough. He would argue that overindulgence in any pleasure, no matter how harmless it might seem at first, eventually leads to imbalance. When we let one aspect of life take over, other important things start to slip away. This doesn't mean Aristotle was anti-pleasure. Quite the opposite, actually. He was very much in favor of finding joy in life. But he'd remind us that the best life isn't one where we chase pleasure at every turn, it's one where we enjoy pleasure as part of a balanced, thoughtful life. For Aristotle, moderation isn't just a rule to follow, it's a way to ensure we get the most out of life. When we live in balance, we appreciate things more. We experience pleasures deeply, but we don't become ruled by them. At the end of the day, Aristotle knew that moderation helps us avoid extremes, whether it's intellectual overindulgence or simply overdoing any form of pleasure. By living with this balance in mind, we stay more grounded and connected to the bigger picture. It's about savoring the pleasures we encounter, while not letting them take the reins. A life with moderation is, In Aristotle's view, one that's more fulfilling, more in tune with who we are, and more meaningful in the long run. Number 5. The role of emotions in ethical decision-making. Aristotle had some pretty interesting things to say about emotions, especially when it comes to making decisions. Now, today, emotions can sometimes get a bad rap. We're often told to think logically or not let feelings cloud our judgment. And sure, there's some truth in that. But for Aristotle, emotions weren't just something to be tamed or pushed aside. They actually had a role, a big one, in fact, in how we navigate ethical decisions. So, how does that work? Well, first off, Aristotle wasn't about throwing emotions out the window. He believed they could guide us in the right direction, as long as we didn't let them take the wheel entirely. He saw emotions as part of what makes us human, and in many ways, they can help us connect to what's right or wrong. But here's the catch: they need to be balanced with reason. Let's take a deeper dive into that idea. Aristotle had this concept of the golden mean, where the key to a virtuous life was finding the middle ground between extremes. The same applies to emotions. If you let emotions totally control your decision-making, it can lead to impulsive or reckless choices. But if you try to suppress them entirely, you can miss out on important insights that emotions offer. It's not about one or the other, it's about a kind of partnership between your heart and your head. Think of it this way: emotions can be like a compass, pointing us in certain directions, but reason is the map. Together, they help us make ethical decisions that feel right and make sense. If we ignore our emotions, we might end up following the map, sure, but we could lose touch with what truly matters to us. On the flip side, if we follow the compass without the map, we might be passionate but lost. Aristotle's sweet spot is somewhere in between, where you let your emotions inform you but not control you. Now, Aristotle also recognized that not all emotions are created equal. Some, like anger or fear, can easily lead us astray if we let them run wild. Others, like compassion or love, can actually motivate us to act ethically. The trick is knowing when to listen to those emotions and when to temper them with a bit of rational thought. It's not easy, and Aristotle knew that too. This isn't something that just happens overnight. It's something you work at, like a skill you develop over time. What Aristotle was really getting at is that emotions aren't these irrational forces that we should always keep at bay. They're a part of who we are, and when we cultivate them properly, they can lead us toward better ethical choices. The key word here is properly. He believed in something called phronesis, or practical wisdom. This is where experience, reasoning, and emotions all come together to guide our actions. It's like the ultimate ethical toolkit. When we practice this balance long enough, we start to get a feel for what the right decision is, and emotions can actually sharpen our ethical intuition. But here's the kicker: Aristotle didn't think this was some rigid formula. It's not like you can plug in your feelings and logic and get the right answer every time. Life's a bit messier than that, and Aristotle knew it. He thought that as we live and learn, we develop a kind of moral sensitivity, where our emotions, shaped by reason, help us navigate the complexity of life. It's not black and white. It's more like learning to play an instrument. At first, you're clumsy and uncertain, but over time, you start to play with more fluidity and confidence. That's how Aristotle saw ethical decision-making. In today's world, it might seem like emotions get in the way of good decisions, but Aristotle would remind us that they're part of the process. They're signals that, when listened to in the right way, can help us live more virtuous, fulfilling lives. The trick isn't ignoring them, it's learning to work with them, to let them inform our judgment without overwhelming it. That's the kind of balance Aristotle was after, and it's something we could all probably use a little more of in our lives. Number 6, the idea that happiness requires both external goods and internal virtues. Aristotle had this really interesting take on happiness, or eudaimonia, as he called it. It wasn't just some fleeting feeling or momentary pleasure, like how we sometimes think of happiness today. No, for him, it was more like a whole life thing, this deep, lasting sense of fulfillment. But here's where it gets tricky. He didn't think you could get there by just focusing on one thing. Happiness, he believed, required both external goods and internal virtues. Both. That's the balance we've kind of forgotten. Let's break it down. When Aristotle talked about external goods, he meant all those things outside of you that make life a little easier or more enjoyable, things like health, friends, a bit of money, and a stable life. These aren't the core of happiness, but they definitely help. Think of them as the conditions that allow happiness to flourish. If you're constantly struggling to meet basic needs, or if life is just one endless stress factory, it's going to be hard to feel truly fulfilled, no matter how virtuous you are inside. But then there's the other side of the equation, internal virtues. Now, this is where Aristotle got really deep. He believed that true happiness also comes from developing qualities like courage, kindness, wisdom, and self-discipline. These are the traits that shape who you are as a person, and they're entirely under your control. You can't always control external goods. You might lose your wealth, your health might falter, but internal virtues? That's all you. You get to decide how you react to life's ups and downs, how you treat others, how you grow as a person. The key here is balance. Aristotle didn't think you could just rely on external goods or internal virtues alone to achieve lasting happiness. He knew that life is complex, that it throws curveballs, and that both your circumstances and your character matter. You can be the kindest, wisest person in the world, but if you're constantly sick, struggling, or without any support, it's going to be tough to feel fulfilled. On the flip side, you can have all the money, fame, and success you could ever want, but if you lack things like self-awareness, empathy, and courage, that happiness will feel hollow. Aristotle was all about harmony, finding that sweet spot where the external world and your internal world work together. If you can cultivate your virtues, while also navigating the external aspects of life, that's where the real magic happens. It's not about perfection or controlling everything. It's about understanding that happiness is this dynamic, ever-changing thing that you nurture through both your circumstances and your choices. And this idea, that both internal virtues and external goods matter, is something we've kind of drifted away from today. We tend to lean hard in one direction or the other. Sometimes, we focus too much on the material side of things, thinking that once we have enough stuff, happiness will just follow. Other times, we swing too far the other way, believing that happiness is purely about self-development, as if external circumstances don't matter at all. But Aristotle, in his wisdom, knew that happiness is more holistic. It's about cultivating your inner life and creating the right conditions in your external world. It's both the character you build and the way you navigate the world around you. We've forgotten that these two things work together. When we remember that, maybe we can rediscover a deeper, more sustainable kind of happiness. Number 7, the role of habit in character formation. Aristotle had this incredibly sharp insight into human nature. We are what we repeatedly do. It's not just our big decisions that shape us, it's the small, everyday habits that quietly, almost without us noticing, mold our character over time. You know that old saying, practice makes perfect? Aristotle would probably say, not quite. He'd argue that practice doesn't just make perfect, it makes character. It's through our habits that we become who we are, whether we realize it or not. He saw habits as the building blocks of our moral lives. In his view, virtues aren't just things you decide to have one day. You don't wake up and decide, today, I'm going to be courageous, or from now on, I'll be generous. No, it's something deeper, something more consistent. It's in the small choices we make every single day. We become courageous or generous, or whatever other virtue we aim for, through habit, by doing those things over and over until they become part of who we are. What's fascinating about Aristotle's take on habits is that they're like second nature. At first, when we try to build a new habit, it can feel forced or awkward, like we're pushing ourselves to do something that doesn't come naturally. But as we keep doing it, it becomes easier, more automatic. Eventually, it just becomes part of us, like muscle memory. Aristotle would say that's how character is formed, not through big, dramatic gestures, but through the gradual accumulation of small, consistent actions. The flip side of this, of course, is that bad habits work in the same way. Aristotle was acutely aware of how easily we can slip into negative patterns of behavior. Just like practicing good habits leads to virtue, practicing bad habits leads to vice. It's not that people set out to be unkind, cowardly, or dishonest. It's that they start taking small steps in the wrong direction, repeating those actions over time until they become ingrained. Suddenly, without even realizing it, those habits have shaped their character, and they're left wondering how they got there. Aristotle's view of habit also ties into his broader philosophy about balance and moderation. He believed that the key to a good life wasn't just about forming any kind of habit, it was about forming the right habits, and doing so in a balanced way. He thought that developing virtues, the kind that really matter, required us to find the right middle ground between extremes. Courage, for example, is the balance between recklessness and cowardice. Generosity is the middle path between stinginess and wastefulness. The habits we build should reflect this balance, this careful, thoughtful way of living that keeps us grounded. So, Aristotle's big lesson here is that our character is not something we're born with, it's something we create. And the tools we use to create it? Our habits. Every little thing we do, every choice we make, leaves a mark on who we are becoming. And because of that, Aristotle would say it's crucial to pay attention to those small, seemingly insignificant actions. They add up. Over time, they shape not just how we act, but how we think, how we feel, how we relate to the world around us. The best part is that this process is ongoing. Aristotle didn't think character formation was ever finished. We're always in the act of becoming. Every day is a new opportunity to reinforce the habits that bring us closer to the virtues we value. It's not about perfection or getting everything right all the time, it's about consistency, about being mindful of the habits we nurture, knowing that they're shaping us into the person we're going to be tomorrow, next year, or decades from now. Number 8. The idea that justice is a form of complete virtue. Aristotle had this really bold idea about justice that might sound a little different from how we usually think about it. For him, justice wasn't just about laws or fairness in the way we handle things, although, yeah, that's part of it. No, he saw justice as something bigger. To Aristotle, justice was the embodiment of complete virtue, and he meant that in the deepest sense. It's almost like justice wasn't just one thing on a long list of good qualities, it was the sum of all the virtues rolled into one and put into action. Now, let's break this down because it sounds kind of lofty. Aristotle thought that to be just, you had to be virtuous in every aspect of your life. Not just occasionally doing the right thing or making the right call when it's easy. No, real justice for Aristotle was about consistently living out all those virtues, courage, wisdom, temperance, generosity, in your relationships with others. That's where justice gets interesting. It's not just about you. It's about how your actions, guided by your virtues, affect the people around you. For Aristotle, justice was unique because it wasn't just about making yourself a better person. It was about making sure that what you do benefits others. In a sense, when you're being truly just, you're not just thinking about what's best for you but also considering the larger community, the society, the world. This makes justice, in Aristotle's view, the most complete form of virtue. All the other virtues, courage, honesty, patience, they're important on their own, but they can exist in a bubble if you're only applying them to yourself. Justice, though, bursts that bubble. It pushes those virtues outward, into how you deal with people around you. Now, Aristotle also had this cool way of describing justice in two forms. He talked about distributive justice, which is about making sure people get what they deserve, whether that's rewards, opportunities, or responsibilities, and corrective justice, which is about setting things right when someone's been wronged. And in both cases, Aristotle thought, real justice requires a balanced approach, where you're thinking about fairness but also weighing what's virtuous. It's important to note that Aristotle didn't think of justice as some abstract ideal that's impossible to reach. In his view, it was practical. It was something you could actually practice, like a skill, and get better at. He believed that by developing your character, by growing in virtues like wisdom, patience, and kindness, you naturally become more just. But here's the thing, it's not automatic. You don't become just by thinking about justice. You become just by doing justice, by putting those virtues into action, day after day. One of the really compelling things about Aristotle's take on justice is how he saw it as a kind of balance, a middle ground between extremes. It's not about being overly strict or overly lenient. It's about fairness in the truest sense, recognizing what's deserved, making the right call, and acting with the good of everyone in mind. And it's not just a personal thing. For Aristotle, justice was essential to the health of the whole community. A just person contributes to a just society, and that's the ideal he believed we should be working toward. So when Aristotle called justice a complete virtue, he wasn't just putting it on a pedestal. He was saying that living a life of justice means living a life where all your virtues come together in harmony, not just for your own benefit but for the good of others, too. That's the real power of justice. In his eyes, it's the fullest expression of being virtuous because it affects everyone around you. It's what happens when you take everything you know about being a good person and apply it to the world in a way that makes it better for everyone, not just yourself. In a world that often thinks of justice as a rule book or a system of punishments and rewards, Aristotle's idea of justice as complete virtue feels almost revolutionary. It's about creating harmony, not just following the law. It's about doing right by others, not just because it's expected, but because it's the natural outcome of being a fully virtuous person. In that sense, justice is the pinnacle of what it means to live well, because it's where your personal growth as a virtuous person meets the world and makes it a better place. Number 9. The idea of citizenship and civic responsibility. Aristotle had this pretty radical idea about what it meant to be part of a community. For him, it wasn't just about living alongside other people, minding your own business, and getting on with life. He believed in something much deeper, something he called citizenship, which was tied to this huge concept of civic responsibility. Sounds heavy, right? But at the heart of it, what he was saying is that we don't just exist in isolation. We are social creatures, and we thrive, or fall, together. Now, Aristotle saw citizenship as more than just a legal status or a label. To him, it was about being an active participant in the life of your community. It's not enough to just exist within a society, reaping the benefits without giving anything back. You had to contribute, to engage with others, to be part of the decisions and actions that shape the world you're living in. That's the real kicker. He didn't think you could be truly happy or fulfilled if you weren't engaged in this way. Think about it, Aristotle saw the community as an extension of the individual. So, in his mind, your well-being was intertwined with the well-being of the whole. You couldn't just look out for yourself and ignore everyone else. There's this beautiful reciprocity at play. You give to the community gives back to you, and together, you create something better than any one person could do alone. But here's the part that might surprise us today. Aristotle didn't believe this civic responsibility was just about following rules or paying taxes or voting. Those are surface-level duties. It was about a deeper, more personal investment in the life of the community. He thought you had to care about the common good, not just because you should, but because it's essential to a flourishing life. He really wanted you to feel that connection, to recognize that your actions, or lack of action, ripple out into the wider world. In Aristotle's view, the ideal citizen was someone who wasn't just passive, sitting back and letting others carry the weight. Instead, you were supposed to step up, to engage thoughtfully with what was happening around you. It wasn't about taking charge or seeking power, but about recognizing that your voice, your actions, your involvement mattered. And not just for yourself, for everyone. Here's where it gets really interesting. Aristotle believed that being a good citizen actually helped you become a better person. It wasn't just a duty you performed for the sake of others. Through participating in civic life, through caring about what's happening in your community, you were refining your own character. You were practicing virtues like fairness, justice, and respect. It was a way to grow, to stretch yourself, and to live more fully. What have we forgotten? Maybe it's this sense that we're all in this together, that citizenship is not a solitary thing but a shared experience. Today, we often think of our responsibilities as burdens or obligations, something we have to do. But Aristotle saw them as opportunities, as a way to contribute to something larger than ourselves while also cultivating a richer inner life. So, when Aristotle talked about citizenship and civic responsibility, he wasn't just outlining a set of rules or duties. He was inviting us to see the world, and our place in it, through a different lens. A lens that reminds us we're all connected, and that by being active, engaged participants in our communities, we don't just build a better world. We build better selves. Number 10, friendship is essential for a good life. Aristotle had this deep understanding of friendship, something that we've sort of lost touch with today. He saw it as way more than just a social add-on or something to pass the time. For him, friendship was essential, vital even, for living a truly good life. Not just the casual "hey, how are you" type of friendships, but real, meaningful connections that shape who we are and help us become better. It was through these bonds, he believed, that we actually find ourselves and live more fully. Let's think about it. We tend to view friendships today as either conveniences or sources of fun. And sure, Aristotle didn't dismiss that side of things. He recognized that some friendships are built on utility, people coming together because it's mutually beneficial. Others are based on pleasure, friends you have a good time with, laugh with, and maybe party with. But Aristotle would say those friendships, while they have their place, aren't enough to sustain a truly rich life. They're temporary, fleeting. Once the benefit fades or the fun dries up, so do those connections. What Aristotle really valued was something deeper, something he called virtuous friendship. This kind of friendship goes beyond convenience or fun. It's about two people who are dedicated to helping each other grow, to become their best selves. It's not just about hanging out, it's about encouraging one another, holding each other accountable, and pushing each other toward greater moral and personal growth. These are the friendships that last because they're based on more than just shared activities, they're built on shared values and a mutual desire for each other's well-being. In Aristotle's view, these virtuous friendships are rare. They take time to develop, and they require effort and commitment. You can't just fall into one overnight. But when you find them, they're irreplaceable. These friendships don't just make life better, they make life whole. He believed that without these kinds of deep connections, something vital is missing. You can have all the success in the world, achieve all your goals, but without true friends, there's a kind of emptiness. Life feels incomplete, like there's this gap that nothing else can quite fill. And it's not just about emotional support either. Aristotle saw friendship as crucial to our character development. Think about it, who better than a close friend to give us honest feedback, to challenge us when we're not living up to our potential, and to celebrate with us when we do? In a virtuous friendship, there's a shared pursuit of excellence. You're not just coasting through life together, you're both striving, pushing each other to be better. And because of that, These friendships are transformative. They shape who we are and who we become over time. Aristotle also had this idea that friendship is a kind of mirror. In a real, meaningful friendship, you can see yourself reflected back in a way that helps you understand yourself better. You learn more about who you are by being in relation to someone else. Your friend becomes this essential part of your self-knowledge, and in turn, you play the same role for them. It's a mutual process of discovery and growth, and it can't happen in isolation. Friendship, for Aristotle, was the key to unlocking that deeper sense of self and purpose. So, what did Aristotle know that we might have forgotten? That friendship, real friendship, is one of the most important things in life. It's not just about company or comfort, it's about growing, thriving, becoming the best version of yourself, and helping someone else do the same. We might get wrapped up in our busy lives, thinking we can go it alone, but Aristotle reminds us that we can't. Friendship isn't optional if you want to live well. It's essential. Without it, we're missing a huge piece of what it means to truly live. As we've explored today, Aristotle's wisdom on living a meaningful life is timeless. His teachings remind us that true happiness is not found in fleeting pleasures or material success, but in the pursuit of virtue, balance, and purpose. In a world that often pulls us in every direction, it's easy to forget the importance of cultivating good habits, meaningful relationships, and a sense of purpose that goes beyond ourselves. Perhaps now more than ever, we can benefit from slowing down, reflecting on what truly matters, and rediscovering the ancient wisdom that can guide us toward a more fulfilling, intentional life. The next section primarily focuses on how to stop overcomplicating life. Number 1. Simplify decision-making. Simplifying decision-making is like giving your brain a breath of fresh air. We tend to overcomplicate the process, stacking decision upon decision until we're buried under a mountain of what-ifs and maybes. But it doesn't have to be that way. Stoicism teaches us to break down choices, strip away the noise, and make them with clarity. It's about clearing away all the excess and focusing on what's essential, like cleaning up a messy room so you can see the floor again. One of the first things to recognize is that we often mistake complexity for importance. When faced with a decision, the natural tendency is to overthink, weighing every possible outcome like each one has life-altering consequences. We imagine every angle, every tiny ripple that could come from our choice. But in reality, not every decision is as monumental as we make it out to be. In most cases, simpler is better, and good enough is good enough. That's hard to admit, though. We want perfection, and chasing it just makes us freeze. But here's the thing, most decisions don't need to be perfect. Most of the time, they just need to be made. The more time you spend waffling, the more mental energy you waste. That energy could be spent on something more valuable, more enriching. You can almost feel it when your mind is trying to juggle too many options at once. It gets heavy, tired. That's the burden of overcomplication. So, how do we untangle this knot? Well, the Stoics had a simple solution. Focus on what you can control. Instead of getting lost in a labyrinth of possibilities, narrow it down. What's the immediate action you can take? What decision would move you forward, even just a little bit? Think about what really matters in this moment. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. Most of the noise is just that, noise. If it's not in your control, why worry about it? Another powerful tool is to reduce the number of choices you're considering. Having too many options can feel overwhelming, but we rarely need all of them. Start eliminating the unnecessary. Ask yourself, does this option align with my values? Does it get me closer to where I want to be? If the answer is no, let it go. Decision fatigue is real, and the more options you leave on the table, the more you drain your mental energy. Here's where the Stoic mindset shines, knowing that no matter what you choose, you have the ability to adapt. It's not about making the perfect decision, it's about being ready to handle whatever comes next. The Stoics embraced uncertainty. They understood that while we can't predict every outcome, we can control how we respond to whatever unfolds. So, next time you're stuck in a decision loop, stop and take a breath. Let go of the pressure to find the flawless choice. Recognize that simplifying your decision-making isn't about cutting corners, it's about clarity. It's about making decisions with intention and accepting that, in most cases, moving forward is far more important than obsessing over whether you've chosen the right path. After all, the path you're on is the one you create with each step. Number 2, limit distractions and information overload. In today's world, distractions are everywhere. Our phones constantly buzz, screens glow, and notifications pull at our attention like kids tugging on a parent's shirt. Then there's the endless stream of information, news, social media, email, bombarding us day in and day out. It's no wonder life feels overwhelming and complicated sometimes. The Stoics, if they were around today, would probably raise an eyebrow at how willingly we let ourselves get tangled in all this noise. But they'd also have some solid advice for us: cut out the distractions, limit the noise, and get back to what really matters. Let's break it down. The more things you're trying to pay attention to, the less focused you become on any one thing. Your energy is scattered, bouncing from one thing to the next without fully landing anywhere. It's like trying to juggle too many balls, you're eventually going to drop them all. And that's what distractions do. They not only steal your attention, but they also cloud your judgment. When your mind is overloaded with too much information, even small decisions feel enormous because your brain is too exhausted to think clearly. The Stoics knew the power of a calm, focused mind, and they practiced techniques to limit what they let into their mental space. One of the simplest ways to simplify your life is to be mindful of what you consume. No, I don't mean food, although that's important too. I'm talking about information. The Stoics believed that you should be selective about the things you let into your mind. Not every piece of news needs your attention. Not every email demands an immediate response. Not every opinion on social media deserves your time. So, start by being more intentional about the information you allow into your world. Imagine your mind as a quiet room. You get to choose who or what you let in. It's your space, guard it. Now, about distractions. They're sneaky, right? A notification pops up on your phone, and suddenly, you're scrolling through apps without even realizing how you got there. Before you know it, an hour's gone, and you haven't done a thing you meant to. The Stoics were big on self-discipline and control. And one way to regain control is by managing your distractions before they manage you. Turn off non-essential notifications, set aside specific times to check emails or social media, and give yourself permission to unplug regularly. When you create pockets of quiet in your day, you give your mind room to breathe. The more you limit distractions, the more space you create for what truly matters. You start to see things more clearly, make decisions with greater ease, and feel less frazzled. Life gets simpler, not because the world changes, but because your relationship with it does. When you clear away the mental clutter, you realize that most of the noise was unnecessary anyway. The Stoics weren't about cutting out joy or fun, they were about living with purpose and clarity. Limiting distractions helps you focus on that clarity, so you can move through life more intentionally and less frantically. In the end, it's about keeping your mind sharp and undistracted, so you can navigate the ups and downs of life with more grace and less stress. You don't need to be constantly plugged in to be connected to what matters. Number 3, reduce emotional reactivity. Reducing emotional reactivity is like learning to ride a wave rather than getting knocked over by it. Life constantly throws situations our way, big and small, that can stir up emotions. The trick is learning not to let those emotions control your actions. Now, this doesn't mean suppressing or ignoring how you feel. It's more about creating space between the emotion and your reaction, giving yourself time to respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting impulsively. Picture this: something happens that irritates you, maybe someone says something harsh or your day isn't going as planned. Your first instinct is probably to fire back, let your anger drive the moment. But the problem with that knee-jerk reaction is it often leads to regret. You might say something you wish you hadn't or act in a way that only escalates the situation. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. In Stoicism, the goal is to take a breath, pause, and then decide how you want to respond rather than letting your emotions call the shots. Now, this isn't easy at first. Our brains are wired to respond quickly to emotional triggers, but with practice, you can start recognizing when you're getting caught up in the storm of your feelings. Think of your emotions as clouds passing by. You don't have to get swept away by them, even when they feel overwhelming. Let them come and go. You're still here, grounded, watching them move through. One way to reduce emotional reactivity is by training yourself to observe your emotions rather than becoming them. Say you feel anger rising up. Instead of saying, "I am angry," try saying, "I'm noticing anger right now." This simple shift helps remind you that you're not your emotion. It's just something you're experiencing in the moment. Emotions are temporary visitors. They don't have to define who you are or dictate what you do. Another helpful practice is asking yourself, will this matter in a day, a week, or a year from now? This simple question can shrink even the most intense emotions down to size. What might seem like a huge deal in the heat of the moment often feels less important with a little perspective. Suddenly, you're not just reacting, you're thinking ahead, seeing the bigger picture. And from that vantage point, your emotional responses become less intense, less automatic. Breathing also plays a massive role in reducing emotional reactivity. When you get stressed or upset, your breath tends to quicken, which signals to your brain that something's wrong, making you feel even more anxious or angry. But when you focus on slowing down your breath, it tells your brain to relax, that everything's okay. It sounds almost too simple to work, but it's incredibly effective. Try it next time you feel overwhelmed. Take a few deep, slow breaths, and watch how it shifts your emotional state. Over time, this approach becomes second nature. It's not about numbing yourself to life's ups and downs, but rather about responding with calm and clarity. Instead of reacting on autopilot, you're steering the ship, staying centered no matter how rough the seas get. And honestly, reducing emotional reactivity doesn't just make life easier for you, it makes you easier to be around. People notice when someone handles stress with grace, when they're not easily rattled or prone to outbursts. It creates a sense of calm in your environment. You become someone people can rely on, someone who brings steadiness to chaotic moments. That kind of energy is magnetic, it draws people in and inspires them to do the same. Number 4, reframe setbacks as opportunities for growth. Setbacks. They're inevitable. Life loves to throw them at us, sometimes when we least expect it. But here's the thing, they don't have to be roadblocks. Sure, they can slow us down or even knock us off track for a bit, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not the end of the world. In fact, they're far from it. What if, instead of viewing setbacks as frustrating detours, we started to see them as opportunities? Opportunities for growth, for learning, for getting stronger. The Stoics had a pretty refreshing way of looking at setbacks. They believed that everything, even the stuff that seems negative on the surface, could be reframed into something useful. It's like alchemy for your mindset, taking what feels like lead and turning it into gold. That's the beauty of reframing. It's not about pretending bad things don't happen or forcing yourself to feel good about them. It's about shifting your perspective, looking at the bigger picture, and seeing how even the tough moments can serve a purpose. When you hit a setback, it's easy to let frustration take over. The why me thoughts kick in, the self-doubt creeps up, and suddenly, it feels like the world is against you. But what if, instead of spiraling down that path, you stopped and asked a different question? What can I learn from this? That small change in perspective can completely alter how you deal with challenges. It turns a situation that could have left you feeling defeated into one where you actually come out stronger. Imagine every setback as a training ground, a place where you can test your resilience, patience, and creativity. You've heard the phrase, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," right? There's a nugget of truth in that. Setbacks push you to adapt, to rethink your approach, and maybe even discover something about yourself you didn't know before. The Stoics believed that setbacks were a chance to practice virtues like patience, courage, and wisdom. When you look at it like that, they stop feeling like obstacles and start feeling like stepping stones. Now, that doesn't mean setbacks suddenly become easy. They can still be frustrating, disappointing, even painful. But reframing them helps you recognize that the discomfort is temporary. Growth, on the other hand, is lasting. You learn more from struggle than from smooth sailing, even though the latter feels nicer. In those moments of struggle, you find out what you're really made of. One of the core principles of Stoicism is understanding that while we can't control what happens to us, we can control how we respond. That's where the real power lies. Setbacks are part of life, there's no escaping that, but how we choose to interpret and react to them makes all the difference. Instead of seeing a setback as something that pulls you down, see it as a nudge to rise higher, to evolve. Each one is an invitation to grow, to sharpen your perspective, and to move forward with a little more wisdom than you had before. So, next time life throws a wrench in your plans, take a moment to pause. Breathe. Instead of letting it overwhelm you, ask yourself how this setback might help you in the long run. There's always something to be gained, even from the hardest experiences, if you're open to looking for it. Number 5. Limit the time spent on trivial conversations. We all know those conversations that seem to go nowhere. You're standing there, nodding along, maybe talking about the weather or something equally mundane, and you feel your energy draining by the second. It's not that small talk is always bad, but let's be real, a lot of it is just noise, filling up space without actually adding anything to your life. And the Stoics, being all about cutting the unnecessary, would definitely urge us to rethink how much time we spend on these trivial conversations. It's not about avoiding people or becoming a recluse, but more about choosing conversations that matter. Here's the thing, words are powerful. The Stoics believed that how we speak, and even more so, what we speak about, affects not only our state of mind but our entire way of living. When you get caught up in trivial or surface-level chatter, you end up diluting the real meaning of conversation. Your brain starts to work on autopilot, and suddenly, you're not really connecting, just reacting. The deeper, more important thoughts get pushed aside in favor of easy, forgettable exchanges. Limiting the time you spend on these types of conversations can help clear mental space for what truly matters. Think of it this way, every time you engage in a conversation, you're investing time, energy, and attention. And those are resources that, once spent, you don't get back. So why invest them in something that's not fulfilling, interesting, or meaningful? The Stoic idea here is to be more intentional with your words. Not every conversation needs to be philosophical or profound, but it shouldn't be empty either. What's the point of spending an hour talking about something that doesn't even light a spark in your mind? You might be wondering, but what if I can't avoid these conversations? Sometimes, it's true. You can't always choose every interaction. However, you can control how much time you devote to them. You can also steer conversations towards something more meaningful, more enriching. Ask deeper questions, listen actively, or even guide the talk towards something that sparks genuine curiosity or interest. By doing so, you're not just being polite, you're making the interaction count. Another thing to keep in mind is that silence is okay. There's no rule that says you have to fill every gap in conversation with chatter. The Stoics would argue that silence, when used wisely, can be just as powerful as speech. If you find yourself in a conversation that's not adding value or interest, it's perfectly fine to step back, end it gracefully, or redirect it. You're not being rude by protecting your mental energy. In fact, you're honoring your own time and well-being by doing so. Over time, you'll start to notice a shift. When you limit the time spent on trivial conversations, you free up room for deeper, more thoughtful exchanges. Your relationships may even feel richer, because you're connecting on a level that goes beyond the superficial. And it's not just about conversations with others, it's also about the internal dialogue you have with yourself. When you stop cluttering your mind with empty talk, you make space for clarity, insight, and focus. So, here's the takeaway: be selective with your conversations. The goal isn't to stop talking to people, but to talk with purpose. Engage in discussions that inspire, challenge, or resonate with you. Limit the trivial, and make room for the meaningful. Number 6. Let go of perfectionism. Letting go of perfectionism is like shedding a heavy coat on a hot day. You didn't realize just how much it was weighing you down until you finally take it off. So many of us chase this elusive idea of perfect, thinking that if we could just get everything right, then life will somehow fall into place. But the reality is, perfectionism isn't helping you. In fact, it's holding you back. It keeps you tangled up in worry, fear, and indecision, convincing you that if something isn't flawless, it isn't worth doing. The truth is, perfection doesn't exist. It's this ever-shifting goalpost that, no matter how hard you try, you'll never quite reach. In the pursuit of it, that's where things start to get complicated. You overthink, second-guess, and before you know it, you're paralyzed by all the options, possibilities, and outcomes that swirl around in your head. Instead of just doing the thing, whatever it may be, you're caught in this endless loop of what if it's not good enough, or I need to fix one more thing. But here's a question worth asking: good enough for whom? The pressure you feel to be perfect often comes from within, from your own high standards or fears of being judged by others. Yet most of the time, no one else is holding you to that same level of scrutiny. We're all so wrapped up in our own lives, people probably aren't noticing the tiny imperfections you're obsessing over. The harsh critic in your head? That's just you. Stoicism teaches us that what's in our control is how we respond to the world, not the world itself. Perfectionism tricks you into thinking you can control every outcome, every variable, every detail. But you can't. And trying to do so only makes things harder. Once you let go of the need for everything to be perfect, life gets a whole lot simpler. You begin to realize that progress, not perfection, is the goal. Action beats overthinking. Done is better than perfect. Now, letting go of perfectionism doesn't mean settling for mediocrity or not caring about quality. It's more about embracing the imperfections that naturally come with being human. When you aim for progress, you free yourself to actually enjoy the process rather than obsess over the result. It's about giving yourself the space to try, fail, learn, and grow, without that voice in your head constantly whispering that you're not doing it right. You can take the pressure off. You can breathe. Perfectionism also steals your time. Think about how long you spend tweaking, fixing, and polishing something that's already perfectly fine. Hours? Days? That's time you'll never get back. Time you could have spent moving forward, creating, living. When you let go of perfectionism, you reclaim that time. You stop spinning your wheels and start making progress. And the truth is, imperfections are what make things interesting. They add texture, depth, and character to everything you do. Life isn't a straight line, and it's certainly not a flawless curve either. It's messy, unpredictable, full of twists and turns, and that's exactly what makes it beautiful. When you stop trying to smooth out every bump, you start to appreciate the ride for what it is. So the next time you find yourself stuck, waiting for things to be just right before you take the next step, remind yourself, perfect doesn't exist. It's a mirage. You can keep chasing it, but you'll always be one step behind. Instead, embrace the imperfect. Embrace the messiness. It's where life really happens. And the best part? Once you let go of perfectionism, you'll find that you're actually capable of achieving more than you ever thought possible. You'll be freer, lighter, more open to the world around you. The weight of perfect will lift, and suddenly, life feels a whole lot less complicated. Number 7, prioritize essential tasks. Prioritizing essential tasks can feel like untangling a ball of yarn when you're deep in the chaos of day-to-day life. There's always something pulling at your attention, screaming for you to do it now, and it's easy to get lost in the noise. The trick to stop overcomplicating life, though, is to figure out what really needs to get done and focus on that. Everything else? Let it fall away. The Stoics had this way of cutting through the clutter. They focused on what truly mattered, what was in their control. And when it comes to our tasks, we can take a page from their book. Life gets cluttered when you treat every little thing as equally important. It's like juggling too many balls at once. Spoiler alert, you're going to drop some. But when you start sorting tasks by importance, by how much they actually contribute to your bigger goals, everything starts to feel a little less overwhelming. Here's where the magic happens. Prioritizing is more than just making a to-do list. It's about really asking yourself, what's essential? Essential isn't always the loudest thing on your plate. It's not the task that nags you because it's been sitting there for a week, but the one that, if done, would make a real difference. It's about focusing on what moves the needle, not what just fills up your time. Now, this doesn't mean you need to go all minimalistic with your tasks, ditch everything and meditate under a tree. But it does mean looking at what you're spending your energy on and making sure it's aligned with what you really value. That's the Stoic way, right? They were all about living with intention, not wasting time on things that don't matter. When you start prioritizing, you're not just organizing your tasks, you're aligning them with your purpose. But how do you decide what's essential? One way is to ask yourself what will still matter tomorrow. Or a week from now. If it won't, maybe it's not as important as it seems in the moment. Start with the big stuff, the things that impact your goals, your well-being, or the people you care about. Those are your essentials. Everything else? It can wait, or maybe it doesn't need to happen at all. The beauty of prioritizing is that it simplifies your life. You stop feeling like you're running in 10 different directions at once, and instead, you move forward with intention. Fewer tasks on your plate means more energy and focus for the things that truly count. It's like decluttering your mind. You create space for what matters and let go of the rest. There's freedom in that. And here's the thing, not everything that feels urgent is important. Urgency creates a false sense of priority, making you rush to put out fires that don't even need to be lit in the first place. The Stoics would remind us that just because something feels pressing doesn't mean it deserves our full attention. Look past the urgency and focus on what's essential. So, next time you're staring down a mountain of tasks, don't panic. Instead, pause. Take a step back. Ask yourself what really needs to get done today to move you closer to your goals. Cut through the noise, focus on the essentials, and watch how much lighter everything feels when you let the unnecessary fade into the background. Number 8. Set clear, achievable goals. Setting clear, achievable goals sounds simple enough, right? But how often do we find ourselves getting tangled in the endless possibilities of what we could or should be doing? The Stoics were all about cutting through the clutter, and they understood that when it comes to goals, simplicity and clarity are key. Without them, we're just drifting, letting life pull us in 100 directions at once. It's time to stop complicating things and start setting goals that actually make sense. First off, let's talk about clarity. A lot of the time, we set vague, lofty goals like I want to be successful or I want to be happy, but what do those really mean? The Stoics would say that if you don't define your goal, how can you ever achieve it? You need to be specific. What exactly do you want to accomplish? What does success or happiness look like for you? If you can't see the target, how do you know where to aim? When your goals are clear, it's like having a roadmap. You know where you're going, and you can break the journey down into manageable steps. That's the next part, achievable goals. We live in a world where we're constantly told to dream big, think big, go big or go home. But here's the catch. When your goals are too big or too broad, they can feel overwhelming. It's easy to get discouraged when you don't see progress, and suddenly, you're stuck, unsure of how to move forward. The Stoics were firm believers in focusing on what's within your control, and that includes setting goals you can actually achieve. By breaking down larger ambitions into smaller, concrete steps, you build momentum. Each small win gets you closer to where you want to be, and it feels good. You're moving, you're achieving, and you're simplifying life in the process. Another thing to consider, goals should be aligned with your values. The Stoics were all about living in accordance with nature, which, in modern terms, translates to living in harmony with what's true to you. If you're chasing goals that don't resonate with your core values, you're bound to feel disconnected or frustrated. You're complicating life by trying to live up to someone else's expectations or ideals. Take a step back and ask yourself, why am I setting this goal? Does it reflect what I truly want, or am I just going through the motions because I think I should? When your goals are in sync with your values, the path forward feels less complicated because it's more authentic. Now, let's not forget flexibility. Sometimes, we get so caught up in our goals that we become rigid, refusing to adapt when circumstances change. The Stoics knew better than that. They understood that life is unpredictable, and while it's important to have goals, it's equally important to remain adaptable. Setting achievable goals doesn't mean they're set in stone. It means you're open to adjusting them as life unfolds. That's not a failure, it's wisdom. It's recognizing that sometimes, what we thought we wanted isn't what we need. In the end, setting clear, achievable goals isn't about doing more or being more. It's about focusing on what truly matters, cutting out the unnecessary, and moving forward with intention. Keep your goals simple, make them achievable, and always stay aligned with who you really are. That's how you stop overcomplicating life. Number 9. Cultivate indifference to praise or criticism. Cultivating indifference to praise or criticism is like stepping off a roller coaster. Suddenly, you're no longer tossed around by the highs and lows of other people's opinions. Stoicism teaches us that getting too wrapped up in either side of that coin, whether it's praise or criticism, is a trap. The more you let outside voices influence how you feel about yourself, the more power you hand over to others. You start living not for yourself, but for their approval, and that's a recipe for endless overcomplication. Let's face it, we're wired to care about what people think. Praise feels good. We're taught from an early age to seek validation, to chase the gold stars, the compliments, the nods of approval. And criticism? That stings. It can make us second-guess ourselves, question our worth, and push us into a spiral of self-doubt. But here's the thing, both praise and criticism are fleeting. They're like the weather, constantly changing, unpredictable, and completely out of your control. If you base your sense of self on what others say, you're giving up your power. When someone praises you, you might feel great for a moment, but what happens when that praise fades, or worse, when someone criticizes you right after? You're left on shaky ground, constantly seeking reassurance or fearing the next bit of negative feedback. It's an emotional roller coaster, and let's be real, who wants to live like that? Instead, What if you could be indifferent to both? Not in a cold or detached way, but in a way that keeps you steady, grounded. Imagine hearing a compliment and simply acknowledging it without letting it puff up your ego. Or receiving criticism and, instead of letting it tear you down, you calmly assess whether there's anything useful in it, then let the rest roll off your back. You're not ignoring feedback, you're just not letting it define you. Being indifferent to praise or criticism doesn't mean you don't care about what you do. It's actually the opposite. You care deeply, but your sense of worth comes from within, not from external validation. You know who you are, what you're capable of, and what matters to you. So when someone throws a compliment your way, you don't need it to feel good about yourself. And when someone criticizes you, it doesn't knock you off balance because their opinion isn't the final say on your value. One of the best parts about cultivating this kind of indifference is the freedom that comes with it. You stop living for the approval of others. You stop editing yourself, second-guessing every move, or worrying about how you'll be perceived. Instead, you live in alignment with your own values, your own standards. You become more focused, more at ease, and ultimately, a lot less stressed. This doesn't mean you'll never feel the sting of criticism or the warmth of praise. Of course you will, you're human. But it becomes more like background noise. You hear it, but it doesn't control your actions or your emotions. You might acknowledge it, maybe even learn from it, but you don't cling to it. You just keep moving forward, anchored in your own sense of self. And here's the thing, once you stop seeking validation from others, people will notice. There's something magnetic about someone who's not constantly fishing for compliments or crushed by criticism. You'll exude a quiet confidence, a calm certainty that draws others in. And that's far more powerful than any praise or criticism could ever be. So, instead of riding the waves of other people's opinions, step back. Focus on what you can control, your actions, your mindset, your response. Praise and criticism will come and go, but you remain steady, centered, and unshaken by it all. That's the real power of indifference. Number 10, practice detachment from outcomes. Practicing detachment from outcomes might sound counterintuitive at first. We're wired to care about results, right? We want things to go our way. We set goals, we make plans, and then we get attached to what we think the outcome should be. But here's the catch, getting too caught up in how things should turn out is where we start to overcomplicate life. The Stoics had a different approach, one that can bring a lot of clarity and peace. They focused on controlling their actions, not on guaranteeing the outcome. And there's some serious freedom in that. Let's break it down. You can't control how things are going to turn out, not really. You can do everything in your power to set yourself up for success, but there's always an element of the unknown. That's just life. Things rarely go exactly as we plan. And when we cling too tightly to specific outcomes, we set ourselves up for frustration, disappointment, or even anxiety. It's like gripping sand in your fist. The tighter you hold on, the more it slips away. Detachment from outcomes doesn't mean you stop caring, though. It's not about throwing your hands up in the air and saying, whatever happens, happens. No, it's more about focusing your energy on what you can control, your actions, your effort, your mindset, and letting go of the illusion that you can dictate the final result. The process becomes the goal. The journey, as they say, becomes the destination. When you practice detachment, you're giving yourself permission to be flexible, to adapt. You're no longer stuck in the rigid mindset that things must go a certain way for you to be happy or feel successful. You start to recognize that life is full of twists and turns, and you can handle those turns with a lot more grace when you're not attached to a specific outcome. Instead of putting all your energy into worrying about what will happen, you can invest it in the present moment, in what you're doing right now. Think about it. When you're fixated on the outcome, you're not fully engaged in the present. You're projecting into the future, chasing a version of reality that may or may not unfold the way you expect. And when things don't go as planned, you feel like you've lost control. But here's the thing, you were never in control of the outcome to begin with. The only thing you ever had control over was how you showed up, how you responded, and how much effort you put in. Practicing detachment allows you to stop placing your sense of worth or happiness in something as unpredictable as an outcome. It's about releasing that mental baggage that comes with trying to control what you can't. There's a lightness in this mindset, a freedom in knowing that you've done your best, and whatever happens next isn't fully in your hands. The Stoics knew this. They taught that we should act with purpose, with intention, but without tying ourselves to the results. The outcome is just the consequence of many forces at play, some of which are far beyond your reach. So, how do you start practicing detachment from outcomes? Begin by noticing when you're getting overly attached to a particular result. Pause, take a breath, and remind yourself, you can control your actions, but not what happens next. Shift your focus back to the process, to what you're doing at the moment. Let the outcome be what it will be. You'll find that the less you stress about how things turn out, the more you can actually enjoy the process, and maybe, just maybe, life starts to feel a little simpler. Finally, let's go over rules to help you control your mind. Number 1, visualize yourself from an external perspective. Imagine this, you step outside yourself for a moment, like you're watching your own life unfold on a screen. It's like you're observing another person, but that person is you. This is what it means to visualize yourself from an external perspective, and it's a powerful way to gain control over your mind. When you're stuck in your thoughts, it's easy to get swept away by emotions, stress, or impulsive reactions. But when you take a step back and see things from a distance, everything changes. You're not just living in the moment, you're analyzing it, with a clearer, cooler head. Picture yourself in a tense situation. Your heartbeat races, your mind is buzzing, and the urge to react is strong. But then you mentally zoom out, almost like you're watching someone else. You see the expressions on your face, the way you're standing, and how you're breathing. Suddenly, the tension starts to lose its grip. It's like observing a character in a movie who's facing the same challenges as you, but the difference is, you have the script in your hands. You can decide how to act next, because you're no longer caught up in the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. This shift in perspective opens up a whole new level of mental clarity. By visualizing yourself from an external point of view, you can become more objective. You start to notice patterns in your behavior that you'd normally miss when you're caught up in the moment. Maybe you're prone to overreacting, or you find yourself getting anxious about things that, in the grand scheme of things, aren't that important. When you see yourself through this detached lens, it's easier to spot these tendencies and gently correct them. You're not judging yourself harshly, you're just noticing, like a neutral observer. It's a quiet, subtle way to gain mastery over your thoughts and emotions, rather than letting them run the show. But here's the thing, this isn't just some abstract mental trick. It can actually help you develop greater self-discipline and patience. When you practice seeing yourself from the outside, you naturally start to make decisions that are more aligned with your deeper values, rather than getting lost in the chaos of the present moment. It's almost like training your brain to pause, reflect, and choose the best course of action. You're not just reacting anymore, you're responding, with purpose. The beauty of this technique is that you don't need any special tools or time to practice it. You can do it anytime, whether you're in the middle of a heated conversation, feeling overwhelmed by stress, or just reflecting on your day. All it takes is that mental shift. You become both the actor and the director of your own life, capable of stepping in and guiding yourself toward better outcomes. And over time, this way of thinking becomes second nature. You'll find that you're no longer trapped inside your head, overwhelmed by your thoughts. Instead, you'll have the power to step back, observe, and choose your path with greater wisdom. So, next time you feel like your mind is running away from you, try to take that mental step back. Visualize yourself as an outsider. Watch the scene unfold with curiosity. And you'll notice something magical happens. Your mind begins to settle, and you regain control. It's like seeing life from a whole new angle, one where you're no longer a prisoner to your thoughts, but an active, thoughtful participant in your own story. Number 2, cultivate indifference to praise and blame. Cultivating indifference to praise and blame is one of the toughest, yet most freeing, aspects of Stoic philosophy. It's about learning to care less about what others think and more about what you think, about yourself, about your actions, and about the way you live your life. The Stoics weren't advocating for a robotic, emotionless existence. They just knew that getting caught up in the highs of praise or the lows of criticism can trap you in a cycle that pulls you away from true freedom. Freedom from other people's opinions, which, if we're being honest, we don't control anyway. Imagine this: you're doing something you care about, something that matters to you, and along comes someone who applauds your effort. Feels great, right? The rush, the dopamine hit, it's addictive. But, here's the thing: if you let that praise lift you up too high, you're giving away your power. Why? Because now, you've made your self-worth dependent on something you can't control. You're living for that external validation, and without realizing it, you're becoming a puppet. As soon as the compliments fade, as soon as you don't hear the praise you crave, you're left questioning yourself, doubting whether you're good enough. Praise can be a sneaky trap. On the flip side, there's blame. The criticism, the negative feedback. It stings. Sometimes it's constructive, but a lot of times, it's just noise, other people's projections, their baggage, their insecurities being thrown at you. When we're overly sensitive to blame, we let those voices get into our heads. We let it stop us from pursuing what we want. But again, we're focusing on something we have zero control over. People are going to say what they're going to say. That's just reality. You could be doing your best, living with integrity, and still, someone out there will find something to criticize. The Stoics were onto something when they said we should be indifferent to both. Not in the sense of being cold or apathetic, but in recognizing that neither praise nor blame defines who we are. The goal is to find that steady place within yourself where you know your worth, where you can look at what you've done and say, "I did my best." And that's enough. Indifference doesn't mean you ignore feedback altogether, but you take it for what it is, someone else's opinion. You can listen, evaluate if it has merit, but ultimately, you remain grounded in your own values, your own self-assessment. This is what Stoicism is getting at. It's about not letting your peace of mind be swayed by the fleeting opinions of others, because opinions are exactly that, fleeting. They come, they go, and trying to chase them will just leave you exhausted. Instead of seeking approval or fearing disapproval, focus on the internal. How do you feel about what you're doing? Did you act with honesty? With integrity? If the answer is yes, then praise and blame are irrelevant. They're external decorations, but they don't change the core of who you are. Ultimately, learning to cultivate indifference isn't about rejecting people or their opinions, it's about embracing your own. It's about finding that solid ground inside yourself that can't be shaken, no matter what winds blow your way. You're the only person who truly knows your intentions, and in the end, that's all that matters. Number 3, reflecting on cosmic insignificance. Reflecting on cosmic insignificance might sound heavy at first, but it's actually a pretty freeing concept once you dive into it. Think about it: our lives, our problems, our achievements, all of it, is just a tiny speck in the vastness of the universe. The stars we see at night, those pinpricks of light, have been there for millions, even billions of years. The universe is this giant, ever-expanding thing, and we're just here, for a blink of an eye, in comparison. But here's where the magic of Stoicism kicks in. By truly internalizing how small we are in the grand scheme of things, we start to loosen our grip on the things that weigh us down. You begin to realize that the things you stress about today, whether it's a missed opportunity, an awkward conversation, or even bigger life decisions, are momentary blips. They seem huge right now, sure, but in the grand narrative of time, they're almost laughably small. This isn't meant to diminish your feelings, but to give you perspective. When you reflect on how vast the cosmos is and how tiny we are in comparison, there's this sense of peace that comes with it. The pressures we put on ourselves to succeed, to be perfect, to never mess up, they start to fade when you remind yourself that, in the scope of the universe, it's okay to stumble. You're not the center of the universe, and that's a relief. In fact, none of us are. At first, this can feel disorienting. There's a certain comfort in thinking that our personal struggles and triumphs carry weight. But once you let go of the need to be so important, there's this beautiful lightness that settles in. You start to detach from the things that don't serve you. You stop holding on to every mistake as if it defines you. You stop fearing the unknown, because the unknown is just a part of this wild, unpredictable universe, and that's kind of exciting, right? In a way, reflecting on cosmic insignificance brings you back to the present. It reminds you that while you may not control the universe or how long you'll be in it, you can control how you respond to the time you've got. That's the heart of Stoicism, accepting what you can't change and focusing on what you can. And what you can change is your mind, your perspective, your attitude. Maybe the most surprising part of reflecting on your smallness is that it doesn't make life seem pointless. Quite the opposite. It makes you appreciate the little things, the moments you might have taken for granted. The small, daily joys of life become more meaningful when you stop trying to make everything grand and earth-shattering. You don't need to move mountains. You don't need to leave some massive legacy. You just need to live, to experience, to be present. At the end of the day, the stars don't care if you got that promotion or if you totally bombed that presentation. But that doesn't mean your life doesn't matter. It just means you have the freedom to stop worrying about things that, in the grand scheme, don't matter as much as you think they do. And that's a pretty liberating thought, don't you think? Number 4, periodic self-isolation. Let's talk about something that might sound a little strange at first, self-isolation. No, not the kind where you cut yourself off from everyone forever, but rather the kind where you consciously choose to spend some time alone, away from all the noise, the distractions, the constant pull of the outside world. Think of it as hitting a reset button for your mind. Now, we all know life can get busy. Really busy. There's always something happening, someone needing your attention, and before you know it, your mind is spinning, overwhelmed with too many thoughts, too many opinions, too many voices. That's where periodic self-isolation comes in. It's like carving out a little sanctuary of solitude just for yourself. A space where you can breathe deeply, tune out the chatter, and reconnect with what's going on inside your head. It's not about avoiding people or shutting down, it's about pausing long enough to hear your own thoughts again. Picture this, you set aside some time, whether it's a few hours or even just 15 minutes. No phone, no social media, no conversations. Just you and your thoughts. At first, it might feel uncomfortable. Maybe a little weird. We're so used to constant interaction that silence can feel almost deafening. But give it time, and you'll start to notice something incredible, clarity. All those mental knots that felt so tight start to loosen. Your thoughts, which were tangled in the rush of life, begin to straighten out. There's room now for you to think clearly, for you to actually hear your own inner voice. This practice of periodic self-isolation is like giving your mind a much-needed break. When you remove yourself from the whirlwind of daily life, you give your brain a chance to recover, to reflect, and to recharge. You can look at your challenges with fresh eyes. What seemed like an insurmountable problem might not feel so overwhelming after you've spent some time away from it. Or maybe, after a little solitude, you realize that the stress you've been carrying around isn't as heavy as it felt when you were in the middle of it. Another thing you'll notice during these moments of isolation is how much more in control of your emotions you can become. When you're surrounded by people, by constant input from the outside world, it's easy to get swept up in the energy of it all. But when you're alone, you're forced to face your emotions without distraction. That might sound intimidating, but here's the magic: when you sit with those feelings in solitude, you start to understand them better. You can observe them without judgment, without the noise of other people's opinions or expectations. And once you see them clearly, you can manage them more effectively. Periodic self-isolation also helps you connect to your deeper values. Without the constant barrage of other people's agendas, you have space to ask yourself what you really want. What's important to you? What do you need to focus on? In that quiet, you're able to realign with your own sense of purpose, to figure out what truly matters to you, without the pressure of the world constantly pulling you in different directions. So, how do you actually do this? It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need a retreat in the mountains or a cabin in the woods. It could be as simple as taking a walk by yourself or sitting quietly in your room, no distractions, just you. The key is to make it a regular practice. It's not about withdrawing from life, it's about stepping away from the chaos long enough to regain control of your mind. It's like taking a mental vacation, but instead of packing your bags, you're unpacking your thoughts. In the end, periodic self-isolation is about giving yourself the space to think clearly, feel deeply, and connect with who you really are beneath all the noise. It's a way to regain control over your thoughts, your emotions, and your mind. And when you come back to the world, you come back stronger, more centered, and with a deeper sense of clarity. Try it. You might be surprised at how powerful a little solitude can be. Number 5. Controlling desires through abstinence. Controlling desires through abstinence is one of those ideas that sounds tough at first. It might even make you think of strict discipline or denying yourself things you enjoy, but that's not really the heart of it. In Stoicism, the whole idea is to be in control of your mind, your impulses, and, most importantly, the things you desire. It's about recognizing that desires, when left unchecked, can easily control you instead. And that's not freedom. We all have desires. It's human. Whether it's for material things, experiences, or even recognition, there's always something pulling at us. The trick is figuring out when those desires are running your life and when you're truly in charge. That's where abstinence comes in, not as punishment, but as a way to prove to yourself that you don't need those things to be happy, fulfilled, or at peace. It's like flexing your mental muscle. Let's say there's something you really want. It could be anything, something you think will make your life better, easier, more enjoyable. It's easy to convince yourself that you need it, that it's essential. But do you really? The Stoics would challenge you to pause and ask, what happens if I don't get this thing? Will my world fall apart? Most of the time, the answer is no. That's where the practice of abstinence can come in. It's about stepping back from that desire and seeing if you're still okay without it. And here's the surprising part. Once you practice abstinence, even for a little while, you realize that a lot of your desires are not as necessary as they seem. That craving you thought was so strong, it starts to fade. You feel more in control, more grounded. It's liberating to know that you don't need the thing you once thought was essential. The power it held over you weakens. But it's not just about saying no to everything all the time. That's not realistic or healthy. Stoicism isn't about rejecting life's pleasures, it's about making sure those pleasures don't control you. When you practice abstinence, you're not cutting off joy or fun. You're just taking a step back to make sure that joy and fun aren't the things driving you. It's like giving yourself space to breathe. You choose when and how you engage with those desires, instead of being pulled along by them mindlessly. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Over time, you get better at this. Your desires start to lose their grip. You begin to notice that your mind is clearer, your decisions more intentional. You're not reacting impulsively anymore. You're in the driver's seat, and that's what Stoicism is really about: self-mastery. It's the ability to say, "I don't need this," and feel perfectly fine, even empowered, by that choice. The practice of abstinence is like a reset button for your mind. It clears away the clutter, the constant craving, the noise that often gets in the way of clear thinking. By intentionally stepping away from the things you want, even temporarily, you're reminding yourself that your peace of mind doesn't depend on having those things. It's yours, always. And that's a powerful realization. So, controlling desires through abstinence isn't about deprivation. It's about freedom. It's about reclaiming the space in your mind that desire tries to dominate. It's about proving to yourself, again and again, that you are in control of your thoughts, your actions, and your happiness. And in the end, that's what Stoicism is all about: becoming the master of your own life, free from the chains of unnecessary wants. Number 6. Develop a philosophy of duty. Developing a philosophy of duty might sound like something out of an ancient textbook, but it's actually a game changer when it comes to controlling your mind. Duty, in the Stoic sense, isn't about following some rigid rules or external expectations. It's about knowing what you stand for, understanding what's important to you deep down, and committing to that. It's your personal North Star. Once you figure out what that is, everything else becomes a little clearer. You can stop wasting energy on things that don't really matter, and focus your mind on what does. When we talk about duty, we're really talking about living in line with your own principles, your values. It's asking yourself, what kind of person do I want to be? Not just in some far-off future, but right now, in the little everyday decisions you make. What actions align with who you want to be? That's your duty. The Stoics believe that every one of us has a role to play, and the key to peace of mind is figuring out what that role is, and then sticking to it, even when it's hard. The tricky part? Our minds tend to pull us in 1,000 directions. One moment you're motivated and focused, and the next, you're distracted, overwhelmed, or doubting everything. But when you have a solid sense of duty, it acts like a filter. Suddenly, not everything deserves your attention. That negative thought that tries to throw you off course? It becomes just a fleeting cloud passing by. You don't chase it because you've got something more important to focus on. Your duty keeps you grounded. And here's the thing, duty isn't always glamorous or easy. It's not about chasing after what feels good in the moment, but about doing what you know is right, even when you don't feel like it. There will be days when your mind wants to give up, when it wants to take the easy way out. That's when having this philosophy of duty really pays off. It's like a mental compass that keeps you pointed in the right direction, no matter how rough the path gets. You don't let every little emotion or external event throw you off course because you know what you're here to do. Now, let's get real, this isn't about being some stoic robot who doesn't feel anything. It's not about suppressing your emotions or pretending like nothing bothers you. It's about recognizing that your emotions are there, but they don't have to run the show. Duty is what keeps your mind focused on the bigger picture. Emotions? They're like weather, they come and go. But your duty? That's the mountain that stands firm, no matter the storm. When you commit to a philosophy of duty, you free your mind from all the noise. You stop second-guessing every decision, worrying about what others think, or being pulled into every little drama. Instead, you ask yourself, does this align with my duty? Does this serve my purpose? And if the answer is no, you move on, guilt-free. It's like a mental shortcut that saves you from the endless overthinking that can bog you down. What's amazing about this approach is that it simplifies your life. Suddenly, you don't need a million different goals or plans. You just need to stay true to your duty, whatever that means for you. It gives you clarity, direction, and, most importantly, control over your mind. So, in a way, developing a philosophy of duty isn't about adding something new to your life. It's about stripping away the unnecessary, getting back to what's essential, and letting that guide you. And once you do that, you'll find your mind becomes a lot quieter, a lot more focused, and, ultimately, a lot more free. Number 7, practicing non-attachment to relationships. Let's dive into something that sounds a bit counterintuitive but is actually deeply freeing: practicing non-attachment to relationships. Yeah, I know, relationships are often at the core of our lives, and the idea of not being attached to them might feel a little unsettling. But here's the thing, non-attachment doesn't mean you stop caring, stop loving, or stop investing in the people around you. It's not about becoming cold or distant. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. It's about caring deeply, but without losing yourself in the process. Think of it this way, relationships are like rivers. They flow, they change, they evolve. Sometimes they're calm and peaceful, other times, they can be turbulent. But here's the catch, we often try to build dams around these rivers, trying to control them, trying to hold on to them exactly as they are. We cling. We attach. We depend. And that's where we get into trouble. When you're overly attached to a relationship, your happiness starts to depend on it. You begin to wrap your sense of self-worth around another person's presence, approval, or affection. And that's risky, because no relationship stays the same forever. People grow, change, and sometimes drift apart. But if you're practicing non-attachment, you're able to flow with those changes instead of fighting against them. You remain grounded in yourself, knowing that while relationships are important, they don't define you. They're a part of your life, but not your whole life. Now, this doesn't mean you should just shrug off relationships or stop putting effort into them. Non-attachment is about finding a balance. You can still love and be present in your relationships without being consumed by them. When you're non-attached, you appreciate the other person for who they are, without needing them to be anything else for your own happiness. You're not constantly trying to fix, mold, or control them. You allow them to be free, and in doing so, you also free yourself from the heavy weight of expectation. Here's where it gets interesting. Non-attachment actually makes relationships healthier. When you let go of that clinging need, you become more present, more open, more accepting. You can enjoy the relationship for what it is, without the constant anxiety about where it's going or whether it's going to last. The pressure lifts. You're not trying to force things to stay the same, and that gives both you and the other person room to breathe and grow. This practice also helps when things don't go as planned. Relationships end. People move on. Life happens. And when you're attached, that can feel devastating. It feels like you're losing a part of yourself. But with non-attachment, you're able to see the relationship for what it was, a beautiful part of your journey, but not the entirety of it. You can let go with grace, knowing that your worth isn't tied to any single person or connection. The Stoic idea behind this is simple: nothing outside of you is truly yours. Not your possessions, not your status, and yes, not even your relationships. People come into your life for a time, but they're not something you can possess or hold on to. Once you accept that, you start to appreciate relationships in a more profound way. You see them as experiences, moments to be cherished, but not clung to. And that gives you so much peace. So how do you practice non-attachment in relationships? Start by recognizing when you're getting too caught up in needing someone else to validate you or make you happy. Step back. Remind yourself that you are whole on your own. This doesn't mean pulling away emotionally. It means stepping into a space where you can love and appreciate without the desperate need for things to stay the same. It's about loosening that grip so you can experience relationships with more freedom, joy, and, oddly enough, more love. In the end, non-attachment is like learning to hold things lightly. It's knowing that people will come and go, that relationships will change, and being okay with that. You're still there, grounded in yourself, able to love fully without fear of loss or disappointment. And that kind of love? It's so much more powerful, because it's free from the chains of expectation and attachment. It's love without conditions. It's love with freedom. Number 8, cognitive reframing. Cognitive reframing is like having a superpower for your mind. It's the ability to shift your perspective, to see things in a new light, and to change the way you interpret the world around you. In Stoicism, this is key. Why? Because, as the Stoics teach, it's not the events in our lives that upset us, it's how we think about those events. Our thoughts, not the outside world, are what drive our emotions. And this is where reframing comes in. Think of cognitive reframing as hitting the refresh button in your brain. When something happens, you don't have to stick with your first, automatic reaction. You can step back, look at the situation, and ask yourself, is there another way I can view this? It's like you're zooming out, seeing the bigger picture instead of getting lost in the details. Here's the thing, we're constantly creating stories in our heads about what's happening around us. Sometimes those stories are helpful, but other times they drag us down. We might assume the worst, catastrophize, or make a mountain out of a molehill. Cognitive reframing is a way to take back control of that narrative. Instead of letting your mind run wild with negative interpretations, you get to decide what story you want to tell yourself. Let's break it down a little. Imagine something happens that frustrates you, something you didn't expect, or maybe even something that feels unfair. Your initial reaction might be anger, disappointment, or even stress. That's normal. But Stoicism teaches us that we can choose how we respond. You can look at the same situation and ask, how can I see this differently? Maybe it's an opportunity to learn. Maybe it's a chance to grow in patience. Or maybe, just maybe, it's not as big of a deal as your emotions are making it out to be. The beauty of cognitive reframing is that it doesn't change the situation itself. It changes your relationship to the situation. And that's huge. Because once you can shift your perspective, the grip that event has on you starts to loosen. You feel less overwhelmed, less reactive, and more grounded in how you handle things. The Stoics were all about this mindset shift. They knew that while you can't always control what happens to you, you can control how you interpret it. Cognitive reframing isn't about pretending everything is perfect or denying reality. It's about seeing reality from different angles, choosing the interpretation that serves you best, and ultimately, finding peace in that. Now, this doesn't mean it's easy. Our minds are used to certain patterns of thinking. It takes practice to catch yourself in the middle of a negative thought spiral and say, wait, is there another way to see this? But the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Over time, you start to notice that you're no longer at the mercy of your initial reactions. You have the power to pause, reflect, and choose a new way of seeing things. In fact, once you get the hang of it, reframing can feel empowering. You're no longer just reacting to life, you're shaping your response. And that's what Stoicism is all about: control over your mind, your emotions, your reactions. It's not about controlling the outside world, which, let's be honest, is impossible, but controlling how you think about it. That's where your real power lies. So, cognitive reframing is like training your mind to be more flexible. It's a tool you can use in any situation, big or small, to change the way you feel by changing the way you think. You might still feel challenged, or even frustrated at times, but with this practice, you learn to manage those feelings. You learn that no matter what happens, you can always choose a perspective that helps rather than hinders. That's the Stoic way, finding freedom, not in changing the world, but in changing how you see it. Number 9, visualization and affirmations. Visualization and affirmations might seem like a modern self-help thing, but they're actually rooted in ancient Stoicism. It's wild, right? The Stoics were all about training the mind, and these tools fit perfectly into that philosophy. Picture this: your mind is like a garden. What you plant in it, what you water, what you let grow, that shapes how you see the world, how you respond to it, and how you carry yourself through it. Visualization and affirmations are just ways of planting the right seeds. Let's start with visualization. It's simple, but so powerful. Stoics would recommend visualizing the challenges you might face, imagining the setbacks, the frustrations, the things that could go wrong. But this isn't about making yourself anxious or focusing on the negatives. It's about mentally preparing yourself, so when these things actually happen, you don't get caught off guard. You've already been there, in your mind. You've faced it, processed it, and you're ready to handle it with grace. This mental rehearsal builds a kind of inner resilience. If you've imagined yourself staying calm in a tough situation, you're more likely to stay calm when that situation comes up. It's like tricking your brain into thinking, "Hey, I've done this before. I know how to deal with this." Your mind becomes your ally instead of your enemy. You don't freeze up or react impulsively. Instead, you respond with intention, with clarity, because you've already practiced it in your head. Then there are affirmations. Now, don't think of these as cheesy phrases you just repeat without meaning. Stoic affirmations are about reinforcing the core principles you want to live by. They're like reminders to yourself, mental nudges in the right direction. It's telling your brain, "I've got this," but in a deeper way. You're affirming your values, your strength, your ability to handle whatever comes your way. When you affirm something over and over, it starts to sink in. Your mind begins to believe it because you've laid down that track, again and again, and it becomes part of how you see yourself. The real beauty of affirmations is that they don't have to be loud or grand. They can be quiet, almost like whispers in the back of your mind. "I am in control of how I respond." Or, "This moment doesn't define me." Short, simple phrases that remind you of your power to choose your reactions. These affirmations keep you grounded when the chaos of life tries to shake you. They help you hold steady, no matter what's happening around you. When you combine visualization with affirmations, you're creating a kind of mental toolkit. You've prepared for what's coming, and you've armed yourself with the mindset to handle it. You can see yourself succeeding, navigating challenges, staying true to your principles, and at the same time, you're reminding yourself that you can. It's like setting up a mental safety net for when things get tough. When the world feels overwhelming or you're faced with unexpected stress, you don't crumble because you've already done the mental work. This practice also strengthens your self-control. The more you visualize staying composed, the more you affirm your ability to handle pressure, the stronger your mind becomes. You start noticing that situations that once threw you off your game now feel manageable. It's not magic, it's just mental conditioning. You're training your mind to respond in the way you want it to, not in the way it wants to in the heat of the moment. In a nutshell, visualization and affirmations are like exercises for your brain. They help you stay focused on what matters, prepare for challenges, and build the kind of mental toughness that lets you handle life with a little more ease, a little more clarity. They're your way of taking control of your mind, one thought at a time. Number 10. Self-discipline and willpower. Self-discipline and willpower, two words that can feel heavy, right? Like they're the gatekeepers to the life you want, but somehow always just out of reach. But what if they're not? What if mastering self-discipline and willpower isn't about forcing yourself to be a rigid, perfect version of yourself, but instead about creating a rhythm, a flow, where you're in charge of your choices, and not the other way around? Let's be real, self-discipline can feel like a grind. It's that quiet voice urging you to stick with what you said you'd do, even when you really don't feel like it. It's easy to think of it as this punishing force, something that's hardwired or only for the superhuman. But the truth is, self-discipline is more like a muscle. It grows the more you use it. The trick is to stop seeing it as a battle. Instead of thinking, ugh, I have to do this, flip it. Think, I get to do this. It's a mindset shift that changes everything. It's no longer about forcing yourself but guiding yourself, with purpose. You see, Stoicism teaches us that our true power lies in what's under our control. And, guess what? Your actions, your choices, are all under your control. That's where willpower comes in. Willpower is like the gatekeeper between intention and action. You can have the best plans, the clearest goals, but without willpower, they just stay stuck in the dream stage. It's the force that keeps you moving when your mind is throwing every excuse in the book at you. But here's the secret: willpower isn't about some Herculean effort. It's about small, consistent choices that lead you to where you want to go. Think of it like this: self-discipline is the road, and willpower is the vehicle you drive on it. And like any vehicle, it needs fuel. You can't run on empty forever. If you're constantly pushing yourself to the max without any brakes, that willpower is going to run out fast. So, part of controlling your mind is learning how to conserve your willpower, to use it wisely. This is where routines come in. When you build habits, when you create structures in your day, you're not burning through willpower as much because things start to become automatic. You don't have to will yourself into brushing your teeth, right? It's just something you do. You want the important things in your life to feel like that. But let's not pretend it's always easy. There are going to be days when you're tempted to give in. Days when your mind is like, nah, not today, and you feel the pull to just take the easy way out. And that's where your practice comes in. Stoicism teaches that discomfort isn't something to run from, it's something to lean into. Every time you resist that temptation, every time you follow through on what you set out to do, you're strengthening that willpower muscle. You're proving to yourself, I'm in control here. One thing to keep in mind: self-discipline isn't about perfection. It's not about beating yourself up if you slip up. That's where a lot of people go wrong. They miss one workout or have one unproductive day, and suddenly, the whole thing feels pointless. But Stoicism reminds us that setbacks are part of the process. What matters isn't that you fell off, but that you get back on. You don't need to be perfect, just consistent. Self-discipline is a long game, a practice of persistence. Another thing is, self-discipline isn't about saying no to everything. It's about saying yes to the right things. When you're in control of your mind, you're choosing what's best for you in the long term, not what feels good in the short term. That's real power. You're not a slave to impulses or distractions. You're calling the shots. At the end of the day, self-discipline and willpower aren't about making your life harder. They're about giving you freedom. The freedom to choose the life you want, rather than being pulled in every direction by fleeting desires or external pressures. It's about taking control, knowing that you have the power to shape your own path, one choice at a time. So, start small. Flex that willpower. Build those habits. And remember, you're in the driver's seat. That's how you control your mind, through deliberate, mindful action, and the quiet, steady strength of self-discipline. And there you have it, practical ways to take control of your mind using the timeless principles of Stoicism. Remember, the power to shape your thoughts, reactions, and ultimately your life is within you. It's not about eliminating challenges but mastering how you respond to them. By focusing on what you can control and letting go of what you can't, you create a stronger, more resilient mind. If you found value in this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more insights on personal growth and mental mastery. Share this with someone who could benefit from a Stoic perspective, and as always, stay mindful, stay focused, and keep striving towards inner peace. Thanks for watching.